Chuck and Craig, if you want, I can go ahead and give the pre-meeting talking points for anybody who's new.
Okay, why don't you go ahead, Will? We'll start in a minute.
All right, well, welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us, we're happy to have you. You'll notice that you're muted and you're going to stay muted throughout the duration of the meeting, except for whenever one of the committee co-chairs calls on you. Following each agenda item and presentation, the co-chairs will call on members of the public who wish to speak. You can participate by going to the reactions icon and pressing the raise hand button. It's not the wave or the thumbs up, those will disappear. Only press it once. If you press it a second time, your hand will go back down. If you're calling in from the phone, and I notice there's a lot of you today, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute whenever you're called on. Be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting whenever one of the co-chairs calls on you. The chat is available today for technical support only, not to ask questions or make comments to the co-chairs. They will never see those. If you're having problems with Zoom, you can chat me and I'll be able to help you. If you're using an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section where you'll find the raise hand feature there. And finally, we encourage you not to raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because we might not be able to see you. So if you're having problems, chat me. I'm here for support and I think we can get started.
Yes, good. Well, I'd like to call a meeting to order. This is the April Transportation Committee meeting of Community Board 8. I'm Chuck Warren, co-chair of the committee, and Craig Lader, my other co-chair, is here. And our first item is a presentation by New York City DOT, Office of Freight and Mobility, including efforts regarding mitigation of truck loading and double parking. We have the DOT folks here.
Matthew and Huma. You should be able to unmute now.
Yes.
So why don't you unmute them, and is Huma gonna present, or Matthew?
It's Huma. It's going to be me. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Huma. Right. Okay, great.
Thank you for having me, and nice to meet you all, because this is my first time attending this community board.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and share my screen. I have a PowerPoint presentation. It looks like
share now.
Okay, let me try again. All right, can you see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. So my name is Huma Hussein. I am a member of the Freight Mobility Unit at New York City DOT. And I am just going to go through a presentation that highlights all of the freight related programs that our unit leads, and hopefully touch on some of the issues and concerns that your neighborhood is facing in terms of double parking and loading and unloading. So just an overview of what our unit's vision is. We seek to enhance the economic vitality and quality of life for all New Yorkers by providing for the safe, equitable, efficient, and responsible movement of goods. We are guided by our freight strategic plan, which we released last May. It's titled Delivering New York, a Smart Truck Management Plan. And if you'd like to read more on that, the link is there on the right side. And so this plan is kind of our guiding document. We have 4 main pillars that that all our programs kind of fit within. The first is safety, improving the safety of truck travel within New York City. The second is sustainability, fostering sustainable and environmentally responsible movement of goods. The third is freight efficiency, making sure that we are improving the efficiency of freight movement to, from, and within New York City. And then the last is making sure we're building partnerships and knowledge to increase the knowledge about freight and new kind of technologies and various ways to improve the way we move goods. So this is kind of our blueprint for all the programs that I'll share with you today. There's many strategies and initiatives that will span the next 5 to 10 years with a lot of early actions in the near term, which you'll see in the subsequent slides. So just an overview of what we do day to day. Our goal is to reduce the impacts of trucks on communities and infrastructure while improving the sustainable and efficient movement of deliveries. And so the images on this slide are just a quick summary of kind of all the programs that we lead in our unit, and I will go through some of these in more detail. So I've organized this PowerPoint into the 4 pillars that I talked about in the previous slide. So the first is all of our initiatives related to efficient deliveries. And this bucket in particular will address double parking and loading and unloading concerns that I know your community has. So the goals of related to efficiency is making sure we're efficiently moving freight to and from and within the city, and aligning our practices that reduce the externalities and costs of freight transportation. So some of the programs within this pillar are the off-hours delivery program, our neighborhood loading zone program. We lead the truck route network and truck route map updates. And then we also are piloting programs such as our off-street consolidation, shared use lockers, and other strategies to improve that last mile of delivery. So the off-hour delivery program, the goal of this program is to shift deliveries to the off-peak hours, so the hours between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. We currently have 1,100 locations within the city, and the goal here is to remove trucks during the peak hours of the day with the goal of improving the efficiency and reliability of those deliveries, and also reducing the conflicts with other road users, mitigating congestion, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions that are caused by those trucks. So our goal is to expand to 5,000 locations by 2040. And DOT in particular, our role is to provide technical support, provide curb access where we're able, reduce the noise concerns that come with trucks delivering at night, provide outreach and marketing, and hopefully in the near future, incentives for shifting those deliveries. Our second program is the neighborhood loading zone program, and we are currently expanding that per a local law that was passed last year. So this program was launched in 2019 and aims to reduce double parking on narrow residential streets by providing a dedicated curb space where you can, delivery vehicles can load and unload packages. It's also a space for taxi and car service such as Uber and Lyft, and also a space for personal vehicles to load and unload, whether it's groceries or if you're moving. So a space to sort of pull over and reduce the double parking that we see pretty often these days. So to date, DOT has installed 184 loading zones within 20 community board boundaries citywide. In Community Board 8, we've recently installed 28, and the no parking regulation is within 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., which is a bit different from our general standard no parking regulation. And DOT is currently pursuing dedicated signage to make the messaging more clear on what the purpose of this space is, and make hopefully utilize it as efficiently as possible. Third, we have the micro distribution center pilot, which is a pilot we are trying to launch next year per a local law that was also passed last year. And the goal of these sort of centers, and the image to the right kind of gives you a sense of what kind of goes on in the street today. And this is a picture on Water Street, right outside the DOT building. And so right now, a lot of delivery vehicles try to use public space, public right of way to sort of sort goods before that last mile delivery. And so the goal with this micro distribution center pilot is to provide a dedicated space to be able to do that sorting before making that final delivery, so that it's not, taking up a lane or taking up key public area. So We're defining this as a space that's within either the public right of way, so a curbside or a sidewalk or a plaza, or a private right of way like a building or parking garage, where goods are transferred from a larger vehicle to a green or human powered vehicle. So whether it's an electric vehicle, a hand cart, or a cargo bike. So that last mile of delivery is now shifted from a truck to something smaller. And our timeline is that this year we're kind of researching current best practices in this space, talking to community members in the industry to figure out what they're already doing or what they'd like to do, and then launch this pilot next year. The second pillar is sustainability. So these are efforts in terms of making trucks greener, and we do that in a number of ways. We have a clean trucks program, which incentivizes the industry to shift to cleaner vehicles. We also have a cargo bike pilot program, which we are now expanding to be a permanent program. And I will talk through some of these. So the cargo bike pilot program was launched a couple of years ago. It's been pretty successful. We have 7 companies that participate and over 400 bikes, and we are looking to expand and to 4 to 5 cargo bike corrals by the end of this year and enroll about 2,500 cargo bikes by 2026. And so the goal here is to shift deliveries from trucks to these cleaner vehicles. We estimate that 2 cargo bikes are equivalent to 1 truck. And so the cargo bikes can load and unload and stage wherever a typical commercial vehicle can park and are exempt from meter payments. And there's the obvious benefits of greenhouse gas reductions by using cargo bikes instead of a typical truck. And so, as I mentioned, we're trying to make this pilot a permanent program. And so we're pursuing permitting to allow businesses that operate 5 or more cargo bikes. We're exploring a cargo bike loading only curb regulation. We're looking at allowing loading and unloading at the curb where commercial vehicles can, which is already exists for the pilot program, and then pursuing legislative changes to ensure that all e-cargo bikes are compliant with state law. We also have our Clean Trucks program, which incentivizes the industry to replace their older vehicles with cleaner alternatives and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this launched in 2012, starting at Hunts Point in South Bronx, which is a major origin destination for approximately 15,000 trucks every day. It's very successful. We've replaced almost 700 trucks, retrofitted them to cleaner fuels. And now in 2022, we're pursuing to continue this program. We're also pursuing a freight decarbonization feasibility study, which is a joint effort between us and EDC. And this is looking to explore the barriers to truck electrification and develop strategies to kind of address these challenges. We're looking at potential locations for on-street or adjacent garages where trucks can charge their vehicles once they shift to electric. We're also identifying incentives and actions at the state and federal level and examining some implications and benefits of truck charging sites. Also have the Blue Highways program that was announced late last year. And this is a really exciting effort to kind of utilize our waterways as a replacement to truck traffic. So really kind of activating the waterways for the movement of goods, promoting decreasing the number of trucks on our streets, and really using the waterways to kind of get your goods most of the way there. And then at the last mile, using a cleaner vehicle like a cargo bike or electric vehicle to get your good to final destination. So the image to the right kind of demonstrates the ideal program, which is, arrive at a ferry and then transfer to a cargo bike or electric vehicle. So we're currently releasing a request for expressions of interest to just better understand kind of the challenges and opportunities with the industry of shifting goods movement from trucks to freight, trucks to the waterways. We also have a green loading zone pilot program, which has not launched yet, but the idea here is providing dedicated curb space similar to the neighborhood loading zone that is specifically for trucks that are zero emission vehicles. So we're still in the process of pursuing this pilot program. The third pillar is safety. And so a major goal of ours is to make sure that the streets are safe and that truck drivers understand how to navigate other users of the road, making sure we're doing outreach to the community to understand kind of how to navigate trucks, where their blind spots are. So we have a number of programs related to safety. The first is that the freight unit does lead specific street improvement projects, particularly on freight safety corridors. So this is just an example of one on 20th Street in Brooklyn, where it was a two-way truck route. There's a lot of damage from the trucks on the roadways and a lot of safety concerns. And so we converted this to a one-way road with a protected bike lane to improve the safety. And so this is just a space where we lead improvements to help kind of mitigate the safety impacts of trucks. We also do a lot of engagement. Like I mentioned, we do a Truck's Eye View program in the summer where we go around to communities, make trucks available so that community members can kind of climb into a truck, kind of understand what the truck driver sees, understand where their blind spots are, and just kind of feel comfortable and let truck drivers kind of talk to the community as well. So it's a really successful program. We also have a safety task force where we partner with other agencies and industry to make sure we're discussing kind of key initiatives on improving safety. And then more recently, we're releasing a Truck Smart awareness campaign, which will seek to really reach out to truck drivers and kind of educate them on how to navigate New York City streets, how to navigate pedestrians and cyclists, make sure they understand the rules of the road, truck routes, et cetera. And lastly, in the safety bucket is bridge strike mitigation. So we have a lot of low overhanging pedestrian overpasses, and trucks often will enter a parkway and not know that they may hit that overhead structure. So this is a really important issue for us. It causes a lot of damage to the infrastructure, causes a lot of congestion. So we're working with other agencies to kind of figure out various ways to kind of reduce that impact. And then lastly, we look to the industry, to the community members, to other agencies, to educational institutions to just learn as much as we can about new ways to improve freight efficiency in the city. And so we have a number of different ways in which we engage with various partners. And that is the end of my presentation. I welcome any questions. Thanks for having me.
Why don't we first go to the public, and let's see what hands are raised here.
We got one from Leah Hanlon.
Right. Okay, why don't we recognize, unmute Leah first.
Good evening. These spaces you're creating are really neat. I have noticed the neighborhood loading zones in my area, but every time I go past them, they are full of parked vehicles, cars or what, that are not loading. They're just parked. And as with all spaces that DOT creates, if there's no enforcement, then the spaces are just filled with non-compliant vehicles and the whole thing is rather pointless. So may I ask how these spaces, what kind of enforcement you're going to have to ensure that these spaces are really used as intended?
Well, Huma, let me add to that. Leah's raising an important point, and we often find here when we have no parking zones that people take advantage of that, and that doesn't mean no parking. There's certain people who can still park there, and that no standing zones are more effective. And have you thought of making those no standing except for these particular trucks? And that, and so, and Leah's question, because obviously enforcement is always an issue, but sometimes it's not easy to get done, and there are more of them, 28 in our district, as you said, and I think the enforcement issue is going to be an issue.
May I just add that I'm totally confused as to why there's no enforcement, because it seems to me like it's a profit center, not a cost center. Why don't you just have lots of them writing tickets all day? They'll pay for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, this enforcement is a constant, I guess, concern. Obviously enforcement's done by NYPD, not by DOT. And so we can only do so much, I agree that enforcement is probably one of the key issues here. I think maybe clear signage, as Chuck, you were mentioning, is also important and something we're pursuing just to make sure it's very clear what that space is for. But in the end, I think, enforcement is key. And I invite Matt, who runs the neighborhood loading zone program, if you have anything to add in terms of your experience with the enforcement piece.
Sure, thanks. Hi, good evening, everybody. So in terms of enforcement, as we all know, it has been always an issue, a huge issue about clearing the curbs for dedicated spaces, especially. In terms of neighborhood loading zones, it's only been installed for 3 weeks max, and we're still looking at the preliminary uses of the zones. But I did do a quick observation, in-person observations of some of the zones that we've been installed in the past few weeks. The thing about enforcement is that they are being enforced. Some of them are being enforced, and what that means is they do have tickets on the cars. That doesn't mean that the cars are being towed or the cars are moving. So that's another aspect of enforcement. Although it's being enforced, maybe that doesn't mean that the space would be open. So I think that's additionally to enforcement. It's more of an educational or outreach aspects to it as well, to really communicate what the dedicated spaces are for. And we also, with the dedicated signage, we're also looking to try to limit some of the parking permits that can legally park in no parking zones. So we're trying to limit the use of parking permits there as well. So we have a few different ideas to try to tackle some of the issues around vehicles that are utilizing the space in our non-intended way.
Have you thought of making them no standing zones except for these particular people who can actually be there?
We're still ironing out the details of our dedicated signage and the rules, but that's definitely a possibility. I think the biggest thing would be to try to limit the use of parking permits legally, and hopefully considering no standing as well.
I see we have Roseanne Alberts, another public member. Can we unmute Roseanne Alberts?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have 2 questions. I guess the first relates to the previous comment. I noticed that there are trucks that are parked there all day, as if it was a parking spot. I'm wondering on the sign whether it can be noted how long a truck or an unloading vehicle has to park or can park there. Is it 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 8 hours?
Are you blacked out?
I'm assuming that's also about the neighborhood loading zones as
Right.
well.
Loading. All right.
yeah.
Yes.
So currently, as you know, we do not have any time limits for the neighborhood loading zones. That's just because we wanted to accommodate as much as many different uses as possible. Some delivery vehicles are only there for a few seconds, delivering to maybe one building. Others may be sort of utilizing the space as sort of a hub to deliver to multiple locations. I think, and those would be more in line with our micro distribution bill. So as we expand the different uses by the curb, we would definitely consider looking at time limits to neighborhood loading zones in the future, as long as we can accommodate the different types of deliveries as well as different types of pick up and drop off activities by both delivery vehicles and passenger vehicles.
My second question is, who decided the location of these neighborhood, whatever, truck loading zones? I noticed that most of them are east of Lexington Avenue. There are none on Madison and Fifth. Is there a reason why that occurred? Who decided, and were the residents notified or taken to consideration?
Yes, so the process of installing the neighborhood loading zones, it starts by us coming to the community board, presenting the idea of neighborhood loading zones. At that time, we set up a outreach, so neighborhood loading zone portal online, where we have a interactive map of Community Board 8, where community members can post, or community members can post the location that they would like to see neighborhood loading zones on. So we take that into account during our assessment phase. Additionally, we have created a set of criterias mainly on narrow streets. So we're looking at mostly one-way streets with less than 35 feet in width, having more emphasis on streets with bike lanes as well as bus routes. So those are taken into account. In terms of being east of Lexington, we'll have to take a closer look again. We believe we have a few. I believe we have a few around Fifth Avenue as well. But those are some of the criteria that we are keeping in mind when we are deciding the locations.
Thank you. I'm curious why there are very few in Madison and Fifth Avenue. Does it relate to the socioeconomic level of residents that live there? Because I'm not aware that the residents were actually polled. I think the community board was told, but it never got down to the resident level of consensus. And when you have a bike lane and a truck lane, like we do on East 91st Street, it does narrow the street, the path, the car path, and it also blocks the sidewalk where children and people walk on when you have unloading on the sidewalk, which I don't know if you've considered when a truck unloads, and if they're there all day, they're unloading hundreds of bins and boxes. And that might be a consideration. You might limit to a time, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, that a truck could stay there, So there are other ramifications having that kind of truck I don't know, whatever you call it, neighborhood truck loading zone.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. Yeah, we're definitely looking into, truck, delivery vehicles that are stationed at the curb. Sometimes they will park, unloading a bunch of, goods, using it sort of as we mentioned before, as a, micro distribution hub. So those are all been taken into account to, look into other opportunities in the future.
Okay, thank you. Next, member of the public, Boaz Galil, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Good stuff. I basically support everything that I saw in the PowerPoint presentation. 3 suggestion tips for the trucks: explore self-driving / autonomous trucks. For the loading zones, explore smart parking, meaning loading zones that have spikes and sensors, meaning that only a truck that has a sensor can come over, can basically park over there for a certain time, and if it exceeds the time, it gets punished, penalty. And for the last mile, instead of going to the bikes, focus on robots. The technology is here. If you guys can share your email address in the chat. I can send you some information, but I've seen stuff like that. And New York City really needs to start thinking about autonomous self-driving, robots, drones. The technology is there, but other than that, good stuff. Thank you. That's all for my end.
Interesting suggestions. Good, Mr. Galil.
Thank you. And I wasn't able to unmute earlier, but the previous speaker, I just wanted to mention that we're also just continuing to expand. So the 28 neighborhood loading zones that exist in CB8 are just the start. So if there are other locations that this community is interested in, we are continuing to expand and would be happy to hear the feedback from folks.
Next member of the public is Dylan Geronimo Kennedy. Can we unmute him, please?
Hi, thank you very much. I just had a question about some of those enforcement concerns. I know that as a resident, I'm able to take pictures and submit to 311, but I haven't had great success with that in the past. I tend to just get something that says, it's been handled. And I'm not really sure what happens there. I'm wondering if you have any advice for if there is a better way to leverage just what a citizen can do walking on the street in the name of enforcement, because I do value these programs and I do like when they run smoothly. So I would like to help out. I'm just wondering if there's a best practice or a best way or a best thing to notify to help contribute what I see as means of enforcement. Thanks.
Matt, do you want to take that one?
Want to comment on that? Either Matthew or Huma?
So the 301, I believe does not come to us, meaning DOT. Some other ways, for example, if it's for NLZs, we do have a dedicated email address where we are looking for any feedback from the community. I personally, and as a unit, will be happy to take a look at some zones that are being, constantly being parked by the same vehicle or type of parking permit. We can take a look at those and figure out what we can do from there. That's really for my program. From others, there may be some different options as well.
We do have a freight mobility email.
Unfortunately, I wouldn't be.
Let me ask you a question, Matthew or Huma, on this. The people who write the parking meter and those kinds of tickets, are they the ones that enforce these loading zones?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, because there are a number of those agents, and I guess that's something that they more could be dedicated to focusing on these lanes, since there are only right now 28 of them, these areas, I should say.
Yes, we communicate with the NYPD. We provide them with the locations of neighborhood loading zones as we install them. So to make sure that they're aware of these new regulations, and try to have a stronger partnership as we can with the traffic enforcement agencies.
But I think my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, on enforcement is, this gentleman was talking about taking a picture. You could take a picture, even if it has a certain time on it, and that somebody's been there, but then the traffic enforcement agent really has to go there and see that that person is still, parked there when they're not supposed to be. And I think it's a hard thing to enforce in general. That's why enforcement is always such a tricky thing. So I think calling 311, unless 311 is programmed to send somebody out there to check on it, it's not going to work.
We'll just put the email to our freight mobility unit in the chat. So we welcome feedback there or comments about issues.
So maybe on those neighborhood loading zones, send the email to the freight mobility people, and maybe they can do something.
Especially if it's a recurring issue, that's helpful for us.
Yeah. Okay, good. let's see, we have Evelyn David, I believe is next, public member. Can we unmute Evelyn David, please?
Hello. Hi.
Yes, we hear you.
Good evening. Hi.
Hi.
Good evening. You know, in answer to the resident who was talking about the parking zones on east of Lexington Avenue, the entire west side is is for loading and unloading non-residential parking from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. On Lex, and then part of some of the east side of Lex is also got the same regulations. We have 4 parking spaces left in the immediate neighborhood in the East 60s. Please. And then we have restaurants on the street, okay? And you might be able to slide in between 2 restaurants if they don't load their bikes in there. So it's really tricky living here. And the other thing, so that is an answer to why maybe these spots are going on east of Lex. And the other thing is we don't have a lot of big trucks unloading double parked because there aren't big stores on Lex. On 3rd Avenue, that's a completely different story. At 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:30 in the morning. You know, just for FYI, and maybe that's why creating these spots will be good and alleviate some traffic on 3rd Avenue. Because there's double parking all over the place in the morning. And I can attest to that because I have to go up 3rd Avenue in the morning. The other thing is, what was I going to say? Paris, you have to deliver your goods before 7 in the morning. I know that that's probably maybe cruel and maybe it's impossible for some of the big stores because they can't get to their warehouses or not open. You know, we have a different system here, but that is something that is Parisian. So just if you keep that in mind, and also about Lex, please have pity on us. Okay, I think we're down to the bare bones. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for coming and sharing. And I opened up the websites to see what the new regs were, and so thank you very much. Okay, good evening.
Thanks. I think, why don't we go to the board now? Because, and Craig, how about, obviously my co-chair, Craig, please chime in.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I've been unmuted. I've been muted, so I wanted to just make sure that nothing here was disrupting anyone. But I just first wanted to thank DOT for providing this presentation. I know that I had probably been nagging Colleen for a while to have this presentation because I had seen through my professional work various presentations from the Office of Freight and Mobility, and I just thought this was so phenomenal in terms of the information that's provided and educating our community on the different initiatives that are offered. So I just want to start off with that. Thank you and those accolades. Just a few notes and then a few comments and questions. You mentioned bridge strike mitigation. I think, as you probably know, we have a major issue here with the FDR Drive. I live right adjacent to the Gracie Mansion overpass at 90th Street, and it's constant where we hear these huge explosion sounds, which are trucks hitting there. And I understand from past discussions that it's due to the fact that it's purposely lower here because the idea is that the trucks will get stuck closer to the entrance to that underpass rather than further in where if they get lodged in, they're harder to deal with. But I just hope that we can see some ways to further mitigate the issue, because clearly, although I know how many attempts there have been to try to add signage and add warnings and such, it's still just not working. In terms of neighborhood loading zones, I just wanted to offer one comment. I'm extremely grateful that they're here, and I'm hoping that as time goes on, that we'll settle into a good pattern in terms of people using them appropriately, and that enforcement will be amped. And you mentioned that there is work being done to try to provide dedicated and improved signage. I think that would be great. I think we need to have some sort of defined time limit so people are aware of what it is. But in the interim, I would strongly suggest that the signs, that the branded signs for the neighborhood loading zones that are out there now be placed higher. Because right now, if you're in a car and you see no parking 8 to 6, based on where you are from the driver's seat, you may not see further down the pole, especially if there's a car blocking it, that there's a neighborhood loading zone sign. So I would strongly suggest that, and if not everywhere, then in this district, that maybe those get placed higher so they're more visible to people who would potentially use it. One of my questions is, and I've been a strong supporter of neighborhood loading zones. I want to see them just inundate our district, because I think there's so much need to have loading and unloading, especially for people who are getting in and out of vehicles everywhere. But when we were provided with the proposal and we voted on it in January, I believe there were 36 locations that were identified in our district, and you kept alluding to 28 in here. I just wanted to see clarity if that is 28, and if so, what happened to the other 6? Are they being installed later, or were they determined not to be feasible, or what is the deal with that? And also, I just want to note for everyone who's talking about the distribution of them, that they are actually pretty evenly distributed between the eastern half and western half of the district. If we look at 3rd Avenue as the dividing line, it is, at least the proposal, the original proposal was pretty much even. And then after that, I just have, I'll just make my last comments, which before you ask the neighborhood loading zone question. I love the idea of this micro distribution center as pilot, and just want to know, how do we sign up for this, or how can we request that we have a location as a pilot in our district? I think that would be tremendous, because we desperately need it, because we have so many issues with warehousing taking place that creates a lot of congestion, and frankly, it's unsafe for everyone, and pedestrians also, who have to try to negotiate their way around them, whether it be crossing streets with cars having to move around trucks that are unloading, or on sidewalks where it's taking up valuable parking, sidewalk space where it's desperately needed. So those are my 2 questions regarding the neighborhood loading zone locations and the future micro distribution centers pilot. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you. I can answer the micro distribution question, and I'll pass it on to Matt for the NLZ question. In terms of, how to let us know if you want to participate in the pilot, we will be releasing an RFEI, a request for information, in the coming months. And so just look out for that. And we would love for you to respond, because that RFEI is really going to both industry folk and community members on how you would like to see this kind of the pilot get initiated, and whether you want to be a part of it. So feel free to respond to the RFEI, also email us. So I just have it in writing, and we'll just keep in touch as we launch this pilot.
All right, great.
Matt, do you want to comment on Craig's other question about seems to be 8 fewer sites?
Yes, so it's a combination of both of what you mentioned. So there's a few that are currently paused due to some construction work in some of the locations that we were looking to install the neighborhood loading zones. The others being not necessarily unfeasible, but we paused there for a bit, especially the ones are along the avenues, and it may not have directly fit our criteria. We wanted to take a closer look at some of the locations that we proposed in the beginning, and try to reassess the necessities of them, and hopefully in the future, we can come back and install more.
You said it was on the avenues where they're delayed?
Mainly on the avenues, yes.
Right, and I think we had, what, 5 or 6 avenue locations? It was not a lot. No, I appreciate that answer. I'll just request if you can or if it's available, just let me know and I'll look it up. But if we could just have a list of the locations where they are right now, I think that would just be good to have for our records.
Yeah, we can send that around after the meeting.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks, Craig. Let's see, next is Valerie Mason. Can we unmute Valerie? She's had her hand up for a while.
Oh, guys, can you go to the next person? Yeah, it's Valerie. Can you go to the next person?
Sure.
I'm just switching to the actual Zoom, so it'd be easier for me. I appreciate that.
Valerie,
Thank you.
that's fine. We'll get back to you. Billy Freeland, the next. Let's unmute Billy. He's here. I saw him. I see him.
I'm here. Good evening, everybody. I have a couple questions, if I may. And thanks to DOT for joining us. It's on the micro distribution centers. The first question is just, I don't know enough about the legislation that created these, but is any sort of zoning change, I guess, required as you sort of think about where you're going to pilot these? And as I think about what these would look like, I'm thinking about these sort of convenience delivery locations that have sprung up all throughout Manhattan, 1520 and Joker and Gorilla, and you may know what I'm thinking of, but is that what these would ultimately look like? Almost like a storefront with sort of the cargo bikes and so forth stationed, but for the purpose of doing that last mile delivery. Is that what we're talking about?
That's one of the ways that we could implement this, but we're really leaving it fairly open. To respond to your zoning question, because this is going to be a DOT operated program, we are not looking at zoning. We're trying to do what we can within our purview. So within the curbside, within the areas that we kind of are able to navigate to the public right of way. But we're very open to considering whether it's, in a plaza, at a curbside, on a wider sidewalk area, in a private lot, partnering with folks that have land space, have storefronts that we could use. But the ultimate purpose is really just to minimize the truck deliveries on these residential streets and kind of provide a hub where those trucks can drop off those goods, and then the last mile can be done in a different, less aggressive way. So any way that we can accomplish that is really our goal. And so the purpose of kind of this year and releasing that request for information is kind of understanding what is already being done in the space, maybe informally or in other cities or states or countries, and then also understanding what like the industry would need in terms of support to be able to initiate something like this. So we're leaving it open for now and really want to hear from lots of different partners before kind of landing on how we design the pilot itself.
That's helpful. And then I was, listening to what you're saying about the off-hour delivery program. I'm now picturing that there's going to be some commercial entities for whom it doesn't quite work because they're closed during those hours. And so I'm wondering, do you see yourselves trying to facilitate, I guess, having those entities benefit from the micro distribution centers in the following sense? Let's say those entities can't receive overnight the delivery. You could potentially use the micro distribution centers as a place in which to keep those deliveries overnight. So you get the deliveries done overnight. And then when the deliveries are made during the busier, I guess, hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or whatever it may be, it gets done through cargo bikes and less intrusive means. Are you thinking at all of using the micro distribution centers for that purpose, or am I a little far afield on that?
I mean, that's a great idea. It's not something that we've explicitly thought about, but all of these programs we're using, we want to merge them all, like same with the Blue Highways program, with cargo bikes, like trying to use all of these programs in a way that really we eliminate all of our risks and impacts of trucks by kind of meshing them together. So I think that's a great point, and I'll take note of that.
Well, thank you. I think these are really great ideas, and I know we're eager to work with you on them. So definitely looking forward to that partnership, and particularly on the micro distribution centers and Craig's point. I think it's a fantastic concept. So thank you.
Thanks, Billy. Valerie, you ready? Okay, can we unmute Valerie?
Thanks so much. Appreciate the presentation. Couple of questions. Number one, how much of the DOT's budget is invested in what you are doing?
I don't have a good response for that.
Well,
yeah.
you mentioned that you're trying to incentivize trucks to, go green, for lack of a better term, and things like that. I'm trying to understand, why would we be subsidizing private enterprise? I understand the goal is great, but we have a really limited budget, and I'm not sure why we're paying for that. So I also want to, you talk a lot about educational programs, and I believe one of the biggest downfalls of city government is enforcement. And I don't believe that any program should be rolled out until there is an enforcement mechanism that is in place at the same time that's going to be effective to roll something out. And I'm a little surprised that, when you roll out these programs, Easy Pass has been around for a long time. I think one of the members of the public pointed out, there are a lot of technological ways that these trucks can be timed in these spaces. And it doesn't seem like DOT has an immediate way of doing this. I mean, it's great to lay it off on the traffic enforcement officers, who I believe aren't doing enough traffic enforcement. But I mean, let's do something that's technologically appropriate for the 2020s and the 2050s. And if you're getting a truck license, then maybe your Easy Pass should be timed to something. Forget about signage. We should have something there that's monitoring as soon as the truck goes in, that can give an automatic ticket. And the fine should be significant. Like maybe you get one time free, but after that, they should be significant, because in my estimation, that's how education gets done. If your fine is significant, you will not do it again. If it's not, you will continue to do it, and you will pass that cost on to the consumer. And while it's a great idea, I have to go back to what Chuck was saying in terms of a no standing. We have so many problems already in that regard. So I would just ask that, you guys look more at some real time appropriate technology for where we are to enforce these zones. The last question I have is, did you go around our neighborhood and see where the dedicated micro distribution hubs already exist for Fresh Direct and UPS? Because they're pretty significant, and they're all on the avenues. They're on Park Avenue, they're on 3rd Avenue, and those trucks are sitting there all day in their own little already carved out micro distribution zones, and they're sitting there for free. And I think that's something that you guys can take good care of while we're looking at these pilot programs. Can you tell me whether you've surveyed those?
Not in your neighborhood, but I have seen them in many places around the city. And that really is our goal, is to address kind of the concerns of these happening at an ad hoc basis and taking over space that isn't dedicated for that.
Well, let me ask you, is there, you talked about before being able to go to some kind of interactive map. Is there some kind of dedicated site you could set up so that the members of our community can tell you exactly where the Fresh Direct and UPS trucks are hanging out? Which, by the way, they're using hand trucks and they're using electric bike carts. So they're perfectly within your parameters for that. They're just illegally parked all day long.
We don't have an interactive map for micro distribution yet, but as I mentioned, this is kind of the start of our development of this pilot. So that's something we can consider as well.
Well, how long is your pilot supposed to last before you go live?
We would go live next year, kind of mid to late next year.
Okay. And just, sorry, last question. How are you going to differentiate between the Fresh Direct in your neighborhood loading zone and your micro hub thing?
They would be different uses. So the neighborhood loading zone would be really just for kind of that street, let's say, and it would be a smaller vehicle, versus the micro distribution center is for sort of like a larger hub for distributing to a larger area.
Okay, well, I can only recommend, I want to see fines of $5,000 as an initial fine, and they need to go up 10 times each time they make, because otherwise it's useless. Thank you, appreciate it.
Yep. And we are looking at automated truck enforcement technology as well. I think we agree that that's really important.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next is Mrs. Brown is next, I believe. Can we
Yes,
unmute
thank
Mrs.
you.
Brown?
Good evening. Uma, thank you so much for your presentation. I appreciate it. It has generated a couple of questions for me and surrounding enforcement. I have a problem with the micro distribution trucks that are parked in front of the bus stops. Oftentimes the bus goes by, they don't see passengers waiting because the trucks are in the way. And that's a concern. And when it comes to the traffic enforcement officers, they tend to disappear after 4 p.m. Are there hours from 8 to 4 p.m.? And that's the end of ticket writing. And my last question is with regard to the e-bikes. There are more and more e-bikes, non-commercial e-bikes and residential e-bikes on the sidewalk. Has anyone given any consideration to having e-bike docks? So when they make a delivery, instead of going on the sidewalk, they can park their vehicle at a docking station or an e-bike rack, as opposed to driving down the sidewalk and creating a problem for the elderly and disabled. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We are trying to expand parking for cargo bikes, for e-bikes. And so that's important to us as well. In terms of your first question about enforcement at the bus lane, I don't have a clear answer for you now, but I welcome you to email us the location and we can take a look and maybe even contact PD to see if we can get more support.
Certainly, I can give you some of the locations now at 86th Street and 3rd Avenue, 92nd Street and 3rd Avenue. There's a restaurant on 3rd Avenue. I believe it's Naruto Ramen. I think it's 1563 3rd Avenue. I was walking along that section of the avenue, and in front of the restaurant, there were, I counted 9 e-bikes that were parked on the sidewalk, and it made it difficult. It impeded traffic, pedestrian traffic. So that's something that must be addressed. And of course, this is in the evening, and there aren't any traffic officers around issuing tickets. Do they have set hours? They only issue tickets during the day, 8 to 4? And the address on 3rd Avenue, it is 1596 3rd Avenue. And it's Naruto Ramen restaurant. That's where they have all of these e-bikes parked on the sidewalk, not in the street, but on the sidewalk.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown.
Before we go on, can I just add one thing to Mrs. Brown's comments and just one question? And this relates to one of the items that's coming up on our agenda. And I know it's not a DOT program, but we are going to be discussing some of the proposed changes to the stipulated fine program. And I just wanted to ask, because one of the changes that was referred to in this article I was reading about how the fines are going to be reduced for delivery trucks that are parking in bus lanes. My question is, I know you can't comment on it on the program because it's a Department of Finance program, but has there been any coordination with New York City DOT in terms of the policies of the stipulated fine program? And has DOT provided any feedback? And does DOT have any position on the stipulated fine program that essentially gives free rein to companies to be able to block bus lanes?
I don't have a formal comment. I have my personal opinion, but not one that I can make on behalf of DOT. I personally have not been involved in any conversations, and I don't know about any other team members. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any additional information I can provide, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I understand. I appreciate that. Thank you. I had to ask.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Paul Crickler. Paul, can we move Paul, please?
Thank you, Chuck. Firstly, I just want to say I agree completely with Mrs. Brown at the idea about the parking. I think it'd be great if you could build in plans for more parking. If we're going to have more micro-mobility vehicles, we should have a space for them. It sounds pretty obvious. My main point is to say thank you. I think I love all these ideas. I love especially the cargo bikes and the micro nodes. I'd love to see more of them quicker, so thank you. We're putting more people who are probably low pay people, but more people at work in the streets. So we have to provide better bike infrastructure, safer infrastructure for everybody. We're putting more people in harm's way. So that underlines the need for it. The final two things I would say is I love Billy's idea as well, using the time shift of having the space on the street to allow more of the delivery to be done. And also I'd love also to see a pilot done in our district. I'd love that to be on 3rd Avenue, like Craig said. So thank you for all this.
I just want to make a couple of observations too that I'd like to. First, I noted that in terms of the overnight deliveries, you have about 1,100 businesses that are signed up to do that, and they're looking to go to 5,000 by 2040, which seems like a pretty slow pace because I think that's something that ought to be implemented on a faster basis. And I think if you take Billy's idea of where you have obviously non-perishable stuff that could be unloaded during the night and then delivered by another way, whether it's robots or bicycles or whatever, that would be, I think, a good thing. I also think that one of the things that's been suggested for a number of years by one of our board members who happens to be here tonight, Michelle Birnbaum, and that is, are all trucks that, make deliveries, do they have the kind of wheel guards on them that if they hit someone, they keeps the person from going under the wheels, because that's really how many people are killed. And I know Michelle for years has been talking about this, and I'm just wondering if that's something that, that is something that DOT could require if trucks are making delivery in the city, that you're talking about safety. That was one of your 4 points there. And I think that's an important safety issue that needs to be considered. So I hope you'll look into that, because not all trucks do that. And history shows that's a very dangerous thing when they don't have it.
I think that's a great idea, and one that we've implemented as part of our incentives programs, like the Clean Trucks program. And as we're piloting or launching an incentives program as part of the off-hours delivery program, that's something we can consider as well in terms of incentivizing adding these features to the trucks.
Okay, so we have a couple of more people. I guess people have already I don't know if they still want to speak again. Let me go to Dylan Geronimo Kennedy from public, and if he wanted to say something further, Dylan.
Yeah, I already spoke, but afterwards, people were talking about automated enforcement and more bike parking, and I just wanted to voice my support of those. I know it's a little outside of the topics discovered, but since they were brought up as they relate to some of the issues, I just wanted to additionally voice my support for those. I would love to have more of those, particularly automated parking enforcement. My little pet peeve is fire hydrants. And since those should pretty much always be clear, having some kind of enforcement there would be great, because there's a fire hydrant right in front of my home, which is very frequently blocked. But that's just one example. Just having more abilities to get that done and done quickly, I think would make the streets a lot safer. So I just wanted to voice support for those. Thank you very much.
Sure, thanks. I think Billy, did you want to say something else? Billy Freeland? Can we unmute Billy?
Yeah, yes, a couple of things came to mind. After I spoke, I pulled up the law, and so I wanted to make one comment and then a question. The comment, going back to zoning, I do hope DOT will, if you identify locations that you think are right for this, I hope you won't be held back if you feel there is a zoning question, because the legislation talks a little bit about analyzing legal and zoning hurdles, and I think that would be squarely for us to look at if we want zoning changes to address this need for the micro distribution centers. So I hope you will share those with us, in addition to hopefully sites that are properly zoned for this. Then the question is, I was puzzling over.
Can you hear me still?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. My earbud just died. So I was wondering, well, who pays for this? And the legislation says that these MDCs are designated by the city for the exclusive transfer of goods, but then it identifies one thing that DOT and I guess others are going to need to look at, which is how to ensure the micro distribution centers are not unreasonably occupied by any single commercial vehicle operator. So it sounds like these would be sites that would get leased out, I'm supposing, by Amazon or UPS or whomever. I want to confirm if that's correct. And if not, are you all thinking about micro distribution centers that could in some way be shared? Either they're owned by the city and then they get leased out, or you put out requests to commercial operators, but you would consider having them share them, because this is going to be very valuable space, and to have them all bought up by Amazon and excluding other entities, that could be a problem. So how are you planning to address that piece of it?
We are absolutely planning to have these be shared spaces, not to have exclusive rights by any company. So we haven't nailed down what mechanism to use, because obviously there are lots of difficulties in terms of timeshare for the location, because deliveries need to know what time they can pull up to that spot and whether it's already occupied. So we have a lot to think about in that regard, but they would be shared spaces for multiple operators.
Billy, is that it, Billy?
I'm so sorry. I because of my ear pod, I can't hear anything right now. Am I being asked a question? Because I was just prompted to be unmuted.
No, I just said, was that it? Was that all your questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chuck. Let me try and fix my audio, and maybe we can come back to me. I'm very sorry about that, but I will catch whatever you said. I'll catch it on the YouTube later, so don't worry.
Okay,
about that.
No, I was just asking.
Apologies.
Okay. Mrs. Brown, did Mrs. Brown want to say something?
Yes, I believe Uma had stated that DOT or the Department of Finance is going to lower the fines for trucks that are parked in front of bus stops.
That was Craig who said that, and it's not DOT, it's the Department of Finance.
Okay, because
we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
That's item 3 on the agenda.
Yes, okay. Item 3 on our agenda tonight.
Okay, because my concern is that before anyone lowers fines for parking in front of the bus stop, I think there should be an ADA component where someone is at the table to talk about that's a bad idea. So thank you. I'll wait until it comes up on the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, great. Our last speaker, this should be our last speaker here, for Leah Hannon, the public speaker. Can we unmute Leah Hannon?
Thank you again. There are bus lanes on streets like 79th Street, as well as on the avenues. And I have noticed that the bus lanes on 79th, at least, are in effect from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. Whereas the bus lanes on, say, 2nd Avenue are only in effect during rush hour, so that in the afternoon there is parking, and it's not necessarily commercial parking, it's just parking. And this seems backwards to me in a lot of ways. A, there's a lot more bus traffic on the avenue than there is on the street. And B, we have this terrible problem on 2nd Avenue with delivery trucks that double park and reduce the 3 through lanes to 1 through lane. It seems to me that why can't there be micro zones of some sort during those parking hours on the avenue? Either that or make it all bus lane all day. And then consider doing something like that on the streets, because those bus lanes are blocked much of the day by different kinds of delivery trucks and mail trucks and police cars. They're just not useful as a bus lane most of the time. And if no one is going to enforce them and they're going to be useless, why don't we at least have truck parking during the afternoon in those places? It just seems that you could rationalize those bus lanes and use them a lot more effectively than they're being used.
I think that's a good idea, and I'll take note of it in terms of using the parking space for as we consider where we locate micro distribution hubs.
Okay, all right. I said we were last thing, but I see we have costs, Spanuletti, and I'll never hear the end of it if cost doesn't get a word in. So our absolute last speaker, going once, going twice, 3 times. That's unmuted.
That's not quite true, Chuck. You know,
You don't have to pick up on my cute remarks.
The last speaker brought up the fact of the bus lanes. Why don't we use the bus lanes for micro? Because buses don't use the bus lanes, or the majority of the time the buses use the regular lanes. So why don't we just take over the bus lanes, and we've got plenty of parking for commercials.
I think that was what the last speaker was making that point, and Huma answered that they're going to look at that. And obviously, I think the bus people might have something to say about that too.
But they never use But they never use the bus lane. They never use the bus lane. So that's what annoys me the most. I'm on a bus, I'm looking, there's nobody in the bus lane, and the bus is right in the middle of the road going down 2nd Avenue. It's absolutely, I don't know. Thanks, Chuck.
Okay. We're item 2, I know, is something that Craig has put a lot of effort in. Why don't you take this over, Craig?
Great, thank you, Chuck. Yeah, so this item here is in regards to New York City DOT's accessible pedestrian signals program. Excuse me. And I had seen that they have on their website a place for people to be able to identify locations for new signals. And I thought it would be useful for us as a community board to discuss that, and perhaps we want to come up with our own recommendations as to where to put these accessible pedestrian signals, which allow people who are visually impaired to be able to cross safely. So, Will, do you mind posting my map if possible? Or have you already done it? I don't have the screen up. There you go. So I just put together a little map to show you the current locations of accessible pedestrian signals in our district. And thus far to date, we have, let me just pull up my information here. We have 15 intersections, at least as far as what's indicated on New York City DOT's inventory. And I think there is one missing, because I know there's one by the Marine Transfer Station at 91st in York that I did not see on that list. But we have about 15 intersections, and that is about 5% of our intersections in our district. And just as a comparison, we are very underrepresented in terms of the number of intersections that have accessible pedestrian signals in our district. So in Manhattan as a whole, about 9% of intersections, which is the 263 out of 2,880 total, have APSs. And we here in Community Board 8 have, according to my calculation, 11% of Manhattan signalized intersections. I counted 312 signalized intersections in our district, but yet only 6% of accessible pedestrian signals in Manhattan are located within Community District 8. So I thought it would be a helpful exercise if we had this discussion here and tried to identify locations where we may want to place them. And if you look at the map that Will is sharing, many of them are concentrated in the southern portion of the district. There are 3 along 59th Street near Lighthouse, which is entirely appropriate. There are 2 near the entrance to the FDR Drive at 63rd Street. There are a few near at the entrance to Cornell Hospital and Memorial Sloan Kettering on First Avenue. There are a few on 72nd Street, and then there are a few others scattered across the district, but there are not very many in the northern half of the district. And there, at least in my eyes, seem to be some glaring omissions, such as near subway entrances, near other major institutions and healthcare facilities, like, at least in my mind, 77th and Lexington, between the subway entrances and having Lenox Hill Hospital there would be a place where I would imagine it would be extremely helpful to have it. But I'm not trying to dictate all of that. I just want to open up eyes here and see if we can, as a community, offer suggestions and perhaps even come up with a resolution that we can provide to New York City DOT as far as where to move forward with this. Because the city, as a result of a lawsuit, is going to be installing 500 more intersections with APSs next year. According to the Scott from this article, there are 147 intersections that are going to get them this current fiscal year, which ends on June 30th. And then 400 more in the next fiscal year. And then in 2023, 500 more intersections. And the goal is to, I think, have it everywhere, but within the next 10 years, I think 11,000 or so are to be installed. I think that's what I read. So that's really an overview of this, and I'm happy to further engage in discussion here. So I guess, first we'll see if anyone from the public has any comments, unless Chuck, you want to say anything as we.
No, I agree. This. I agree. We ought to get more of these in some of the areas that you were talking about. They're important.
All right. I don't see any hands from the public, but anyone is welcome to raise their hand at any time. So we can start with board members, and I see Valerie's hand raised first.
Just quickly, this was the picture of the thing I sent to you, correct, Craig?
I believe it was, but I was not 100% sure.
Okay.
Where was that again? Where did you see that?
That was like my sister sent me, they were putting it up on 79th and 2nd, and it's only about 6 feet high.
Mm-hmm.
And so we weren't even sure what it was.
Right, and I'm not 100% sure that's what it was either, but that was what I believe it looked like. It looked similar in height to other signals that have been placed.
Oh, I can't find the picture now, so I thought maybe you might show it just so people can even be cognizant of looking for what it is.
I've since lost it because it didn't come up. I opened it at first and didn't recognize the number because it didn't come up as you, and then I was worried that I just opened a virus, but then I figured it out.
All right, so that's all. Nothing. I just wanted to make sure we were talking about the same thing. That's all.
Yes, I believe so. All right, we do have a hand raised from the public. I see Maggie Lehman's hand raised. Can we unmute Maggie, please?
Maggie, you can unmute.
She's on. Can you remind her on the phone how to unmute?
Yes, it is star. Should know this after 2 years. *6.
That's what I thought also.
*6 to unmute Maggie. If not, we'll come back to you.
Or at least we can come back. We'll come back. Lori.
Hi. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Craig, for doing this. I think this is an excellent idea for us to get ahead of the the planning for this. And I would like to suggest that I think very strongly that it should be around Asphalt Green, that there should be some accessible signals, because I mean, that facility is accessible. And there are people who use, the pool and whatever it is. So I think around Asphalt Green would be great. York Avenue, I guess, and 91st Street or
I think
whatever.
we already, that's the one that's missing from the list that I saw when I was composting that you have outside of Asphalt Green and 91st Street, but at 90th Street, many people cross as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the opinion personally that it should be every intersection, but knowing that it's not going to get that way immediately, I would definitely make sure that it's around Asphalt Green. And also, I would like to see it around the schools. We have a lot of schools in our district, private and public, and I think that in the nearby the schools would be like near PS6, near 158, near East Side Middle, like there are lots of schools that I think would benefit from this. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Laurie. Next we have Rita Popper. Actually, I'm sorry, Paul. I just had Paul was next, and then Rita.
Hi, Craig. I completely agree with what's just been said. We should have this on every single corner, in my opinion, and I think around schools as well. So I don't want to be premature and propose anything right now, but as people see fit this evening to propose something, I'm going to support it. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. I have one small question for you. Could you repeat one of your numbers, please, Craig?
Yes.
The percentage that our district has of our intersections with one of these compared to the city-wide or borough-wide rate?
Yes. So we have here 6% of Manhattan. Wait, hold on. 5% of signalized intersections in Community Board 8 have accessible pedestrian signals, whereas 8% of intersections citywide have them, and I believe I said 11% of Manhattan intersection. Boy, no, I'm sorry. Community Board 8 has 11% of Manhattan's signalized intersections, 312 or so, and only 5% of those have accessible pedestrian signals. And then I think I also said, sorry, I'm just jumping between all the different windows I have open, where I had my different data points. 9% of intersections in Manhattan have APSs installed, but we only have 5% here. And while CB8 has 11% of Manhattan's signalized intersections, only 6% of APS intersections are in Community Board 8.
So what would you want to write as a resolution?
Well, I think
maybe urging them to increase they're mandated to do, and they're going to have another round, but to increase the number of these intersections in our area, since we're based on the percentages.
And just let me point out, so this is coming in the wake of a federal judge having criticized the slow pace of New York City installing these intersections, right, and is mandating that the city must install 9,000 of these over the next 10 years. So this is a 10-year project, and I think what we are looking to do is to try to say, as this moves forward, let's try to get more here and be more and have a proportion of them that's more representative of the borough, and let's identify the places where they're needed most so we can make the suggestions as opposed to DOT deciding on based on whatever criteria they may have.
Can I propose that we do that?
Sure.
I make my proposal that we write a resolution basically with what Chuck just said, Craig just said.
Is there a second there? Do we have a second in that? Okay, that's Lori.
And do we want to identify, so far I know I mentioned subway stations and major institutions such as hospitals. I don't know if there are any museums that would qualify. Lori mentioned Asphalt Green, and a few of you mentioned schools as well. So we could be more general in nature, but if anyone wants to add to that, I could write it so that we say we seek to prioritize certain types of locations, including, I could say, subway stations, recreational facilities such as Asphalt Green, schools, and major medical institutions and such.
Right. I think Rita wanted to say something too.
Yes, Rita was next.
Rita lowered her hand, but Rita, just in case, if you want to go ahead and mute.
And then we also want to see if we can get Maggie, who has her hand raised, after Lori. I mean, after Rita, if she wants to speak.
Greg, thank you very much. How about adding houses of worship? We have some very large churches and synagogues, and I think that they should be near there too.
Yes, great idea.
Should be on every block.
Good idea.
So I'd add that to the list.
Thanks, Rita.
Rita, Maggie, it's *6 to unmute. Maggie Lehman. The new person who just raised their hand from the phone. Give me one second.
Yes, there's another.
There's a second
member.
Maggie Lehman. Okay, Maggie. Unmute, *6.
At work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys. I actually got disconnected. This may be a new business item, and if it is, I'm happy to bring it up at new business. I wanted to speak to the DOT reps who were there tonight, and by the way, I thank you for being there. But it's a safety issue, not specifically the issues concerning the issues that you were describing that the city's involved with now with truck loading zones and the pilot program. But I'm wondering and I'm asking whether the DOT has taken aggressive action to address and reduce the multiple pedestrian accidents that have occurred. This presentation by yours only involves trucks, and I'm happy to have you respond to that question only with respect to trucks. But we've seen just 48 hours ago another pedestrian killed by an electronic vehicle. And I know the CB8 Transportation Committee has addressed this before. But there's so many of them. They occur every week, and they're terrible injuries and they're fatalities. Is this the appropriate time to bring it up now on the agenda? Should I?
Maggie, they're in the middle of discussing a resolution on accessible pedestrian crossings. This is not the right time, unfortunately.
Okay.
No, bring that up later, Maggie. We'll obviously get to it.
Lori.
Hi, okay, just very quickly, if we're going to do a resolution, can we start the resolution by saying, well, we very much believe that all intersections should have that, and then go on, but, recognizing that, we want to suggest, especially these, I just want to make it clear that we believe that every intersection should have this available, even though it's not going to happen now. I just want to, put it in writing.
Yes, absolutely. I'll start with that, and I'll say, well, that it is our belief that every intersection should have APS installed as quickly as possible, but understanding that the city has a process in place where they're going to be putting in X number per year, we seek to prioritize within Community District 8 the following locations.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
I think Paul agreed with that before he mentioned that. I don't know if he wanted to.
Okay. Didn't mean to be redundant, just, okay.
All right. Anything else? Or does anyone want to call the question, or?
Why don't we just vote? I don't think there's anybody who's got any questions at this point.
Rita, you just raised your hand.
Rita, maybe Rita wants to call a question. Okay.
Thank you, Rita.
Okay. Just let me read the roll call as I see it right now. It's myself, Chuck, Billy, Kaz, Lori, Michelle, Mrs. Brown, Paul, Peter, Rita, and Valerie.
Is there anybody else? I think that's everybody. Are we missing anybody? No.
See anybody speaking up, so.
All right.
If you're voting no, abstaining, or not voting for cause, raise your hand. Michelle?
Abstain.
Thank you, Michelle. Anyone else? Last call. Nope.
All right, so the motion passes 10 yeses, 0 no's, 1 abstention.
Okay. All right, thanks. Our next item is the New York Stipulated Fine Program and changes to those fines effective May 2, coming up next month, 2022. Now, I think as we know, this is the way this program operates, it's the Department of Finance that really operates it, is that there are stipulated fines for certain things like double parking. The fine is $115. But then they made arrangements. People can apply to be part of the stipulated fine program. And if they do that, they're waiving the right to any kind of a hearing to challenge it, but they're paying a certain amount. And those amounts under the old program were quite low. So I'm saying double parking because that's something that we care a lot about here. I mean, there's all kinds of other, I don't know if anybody's looked at it. There's no standing commercial meter zone, regulation sticker expired or missing. Just to read some of the things, no standing taxi stand, no standing daytime limits, expired muni meter, failure to display muni meter receipt, front or back plate missing, commercial plates or unaltered vehicle. So those are some of the things. But so to give you an example of how it works and how it will work, let's take double parking, our favorite thing. So the double parking, the base fine in the regular, is $115. That's the fine. The current stipulated fine is $35. So that's really, as I think we all recognize, if you get into this stipulated fine program, you get off with $35. So that's not much of a disincentive. As now under this new program, what they've done is they've said, okay, there are people who apply to the stipulated fine program, but what they do is they go to a hearing, and the guilty rate, they came forward with the guilty rate from September 1st, 2020 to August 31st, 2021. In this case, double parking, 58% were found guilty. And so therefore the new proposed stipulated fine is essentially 58% of the $115 or $65. And that's the way they do it, like no standing commercial meter zone, $115. The current stipulated fine was $35. There's a 70% guilty rate. So now that goes to 80. That goes to 80%, $80, sorry. And so basically around 70, around 70% of that fine, and so on. And there's the fines, some of the fines, current stipulated fines were less above 96th Street in Manhattan and more. And they don't really do that for most of them. The new fines are only one thing, except for like the expired muni meter. So I guess, obviously there are all kinds of different things here, but I think, and feel free to, certainly everybody should comment on this. I think that our biggest concern is double parking or these no standing in these meter zones and things like that. And maybe stickers expired or missing, things like that. Or no standing zones. So I think those are the kinds of things that we sort of would have a lot of concern about. And the question is, okay, this is a program they're going to be put into place. The mayor's office has taken the initiative to increase the fines. The question is, are they up at a point where it's going to really deter people? Although, interestingly enough, when you look at double parking, people who take it to a hearing are only found guilty 58% of the time, which is sort of interesting. I don't know why that should be. It seems to me should be easy to figure out if you're double parking, and there must be a way that the traffic enforcement people are writing the tickets and they don't do it the right way. But I mean, we haven't investigated this. I guess this is something we could have traffic enforcement people come and talk about this maybe, and why these percentages are as low as they are in some categories. I was surprised to see that expired muni meter, when people go, it's only 54% of the time that people are guilty if they go to a hearing. It seems to me that's a pretty, you're caught dead to rights there. You should be anyway. So anyhow, so why don't we see if anyone wants to discuss this? We have.
And if you don't mind,
go ahead, Craig.
Let me just add on to it. And this is from a Daily News article that referenced the changes to the program, but in it they talk about how companies enrolled in the program will now see additional discounts for if they violate, as I was mentioning earlier, parking in bus lanes. So currently they are paying $100 if they are fined for parking in a bus lane. That's down from the standard $115 fee. And the proposal is that will now go down to $80. So I don't know any further details as to what the rationale behind that was, but that was something that alarmed me if we're trying to find every way possible to get buses to be able to move faster. And the article also alludes to some other things that aren't necessarily in that press release that we linked to on the agenda, but as Chuck said, in some instances, they're proposing increasing the fines for those participants in the stipulated fine program, but they're still below the base levels of the fine, well below them. And in others, they're proposing decreasing them. And I guess I want to bring this forward because I think this is one of those programs that people just aren't even necessarily familiar with in terms of its existence. And I think it was worth, especially in light of the presentation we saw earlier, there seems to be a policy disconnect between efforts by New York City DOT to try to find approaches to address double parking issues. And here we have the policies that are in place that are essentially promoting bad behaviors with the idea that it's necessary in order to reduce the burden on the court system and people who are appealing with the fines. And that's why the city finds it worthwhile. So that's a little more background that I want.
No, I think I appreciate that, Craig, because they don't, interestingly enough, they have a bunch of things on this press release, but they don't talk about that one in the press release. Although there are some others here where they're reducing the fines, they do talk about them.
Right, and I think what I had read is that companies participating in the program had received letters from the city advising them of these changes, and some of those changes that I just read were among those that were discussed in the letters, but not necessarily in the press release.
Yeah, although they are, just for everybody knows, stand where the base fine was $115 and people in the program were paying $100, 62% conviction rate, and they dropped it to $70. So, I mean, there's again one thing, or no standing daytime limits, $115, and then it was $100 and it was dropped to $90, so 79% conviction rate. And so some of these they did drop them, and expired muni meters they dropped. Failure to display muni meter receipt they dropped. Front or back plate missing they dropped that. I mean, I guess they're trying to strike a balance here, although I'm not sure that they're doing it and saying, all right, for some of these minor want to just penalize people as much as they could. We were penalizing them even under the stipulated program, but for others, it doesn't make any sense when they're parking and really blocking things, installing things around the city. So why don't we go to, I see a number of hands. I see a public member here, Boaz Galil.
And then Stephanie Reckler also.
Oh, yeah, I don't first. So, yeah, oh, sorry. Stephanie Reckler was first. Sorry, boys. Let me get the.
She is, but I can't hear her. First. I see her speaking.
Oh, we can't get her.
So
what happened?
Let's go to Boaz, and while Stephanie figures out her audio.
So go ahead, Boaz. Unmute Boaz.
I don't have a lot to say about it. I don't own a car. I've been living in Upper East Side for the last 10 years. I had like 10 occasions that I needed a car for moving or for different reasons. And every time I parked the car in Upper East Side, I got a ticket. So what I want to say is that I guess the department, whoever is in charge, they are doing a good job. And I hope that they will do the same enforcement in all other aspects, because 10 times, really less than 10 times I brought the car, and every time I parked the car, regardless of what I read in the signs, I got a ticket. So good for them. What can I tell you? I mean, that's it. That's what I have to say.
Okay, thanks. Okay, can we unmute Stephanie? Will?
She can unmute. Let's see if we can hear her.
Okay, Stephanie Reckler, go ahead. Stephanie, you're on.
Is it possible that you have like some headphones connected, or the other suggestion I would have, leave the meeting and come right back. Often that fixes the problem, and so we'll come back to you. Okay.
Yeah, because you're unmuted here for us, but we can't hear you. Okay, so let's see. Let's go to Valerie Mason. Valerie.
Thanks. First of all, I think Craig's right on the money. This is just another example of the lack of coordination between city agencies. We've got, somebody trying to set up a program and to make sure that people can move in and out. And then we've got, stipulated fine program that says, hey, park all day for $65 and, we love you. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think the interesting thing about it is, I think in the lead into the press release, Chuck, it says that these new fines are only going to bring in about $3.6 million more.
Right.
To me, that means that there's no enforcement going on. I mean, I think, quite frankly, that, just the way that they've used the idling program and the bounties for bringing in the idlers, like maybe we should shift to that kind of enforcement for double parked and, these trucks that are sitting there all day, because I think, it's unfathomable to me that even at the stipulated fine rate, but they're not really saying like they're just giving one ticket for the entire day, because that's even worse, right? You're getting an $80 ticket and you're basically paying less than somebody's paying to put their car in a parking garage, and you're using up the public street to boot. I just think these stipulated fine programs, they are oxymoronic to what, if the city is really interested in reducing congestion, then the stipulated fine program is the first thing that has to change in order to reduce congestion. And again, I'm going to say no congestion pricing program should be put in place in Manhattan until the stipulated fine program does something to reduce congestion, because it is unfair for people who live in New York City and live in Manhattan to have to be subject to that while people are getting away with stipulated fines of whatever the amount is. It's way too low. And the second thing, I just want to take issue with you, Chuck, on the expired meters. I've had three times I've gone to court on an expired meter, and they just don't write the tickets. They don't understand that whoever's writing the tickets doesn't understand what the rules are. And most times the tickets are thrown out because they're incorrectly written. So that's all I'll say about that. Thank you.
That was my comment, that it should be easy, but there's something wrong.
Yes,
there.
that's exactly.
You pointed out what was wrong.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Can we try to get Stephanie Reckler again unmute? She can unmute. And
yeah, Stephanie, go ahead and try. We'll see if we can hear you this time. Yeah, just unmute. You should be able to.
There should be a prompt on your screen.
Hey, can you hear this time? Yeah,
Can you hear me now? Good. Okay.
Yes. Congratulations.
First of all, I think the stipulated program encourages, it's just a matter of the cost of doing business. The commercial companies probably don't even care about this. You're encouraging them. We have a lot of construction. Everybody has a lot of construction going on. There's a worker's truck that parks every single day in front of the hydrant on our avenue. And first of all, I never see a ticket on the truck, and they probably don't even care. It's just the cost of doing business. Plus, also for residential street parking, I never see any tickets. There are double parked, triple parked cars, and where are the tickets? Where are the 3,000 tickets that have been issued so far, or whatever that number is? I never see any traffic policemen going around giving tickets. I mean, I don't know. Boaz seems to get tickets whenever he takes a car out. He's a rare. They must have you in there on their radar, but it certainly doesn't happen. It's like a free for all with parking, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Michelle Birnbaum. And then next.
Yeah, thank you. I think the fine structure basically reflects the antipathy in the city in general with these kinds of crimes of violence. There's an antipathy to punish. With the vendor legislation, we know that fines played a big role, or could play a big role, in deterring noncompliance. And yet, whenever there's new legislation written, the fine structure goes down. It becomes less punitive. It's almost as though, and this is cross-agency in the city, it's almost as though we don't want you to do this, but we don't want you to hurt too badly if you do it. So all of this stuff really is not much of a deterrent. The other thing, when you talk about the broken meters or the meters, why when a meter runs out, you get a ticket and what 60 or 70% of them are thrown out and you think it's obvious. It's not that obvious, because if you can show that the meter is broken or the meter is running fast, that's enough to throw the ticket out. And unfortunately, the maintenance of the equipment on the street is not that top notch. So the truth is, half the time the muni meters are broken, and you can prove it very easily. You just take the number down and write to the DOT. I've had occasions where in the theater district, and this happened many times, it has since been corrected, I think, where you would put your credit card in and you're pressing certain intervals, and you think you're adding an hour, another hour, and then you're planning to add 2-3 hours, the 3 hours, the length of a play. But in fact, when you hit that button, it goes to midnight automatically. And so every entry ended up being a 6-hour cost, because it starts at 6 p.m., it automatically jumped to 12 p.m. That happened to me routinely in the theater district. It was easy enough to prove by putting the number and sending the ticket in with, contesting it. So there's a lot of efficiency that has to go into maintaining a program like that, and with a real intent to make it punitive. Otherwise, we're just sort of chasing our tails. Mixed emotions, whether or not to be strict, whether or not to raise revenues, whether or not to be punitive, whether or not to be only punitive in certain situations. I don't think the city has its act together on a lot of levels, minor crimes and major ones. Thanks.
Well, let me just add a little color to the discussion. I just pulled up, I had located it before, I should have shared it earlier, but in 2019, the Independent Budget Office of New York City did a report on the stipulated fine program, and they provided some useful detail in terms of the extent to which companies are participating and how much they're potentially saving. So just they have their list of the top 10 participants, and the names will not surprise anyone. Number 1 was UPS, followed by FedEx, Verizon, Manhattan Beer Distributors, Verizon, Fresh Direct, U.S. Foods Incorporated, Liberty Coca-Cola Beverages, Time Warner Cable, and Anheuser-Busch Beer Distributors of New York. So UPS, which was number 1 by a far margin, received 254,000 summonses and paid $14.4 million in fines, and saved $6.6 million by participating in this program. That's for fiscal year 2018. FedEx, 114,000 summonses. They paid just under $7 million in fines and saved almost $5 million. So collectively, that meant that, I'm trying to just find the number of total fines. So in total, $47 million was received in stipulated fines in 2018, and the top 10 companies alone accounted for $20 million in savings, and essentially all other so I listed the top 10 participants. All other stipulated fine participants made up the other about 50% of all the summonses that were issued. So let's assume that it was the same thing. So that's $40 or so million a year saved by participants in this program, by being participants in it. And again, that's not meant to editorialize. These are just providing the facts here in terms of how companies.
Well, the new program, as Valerie said, is going to raise 3.6 million. So that's a big offset from that. But yeah, there is certainly a view, and Michelle alludes to this. I think there is a view that the city wants to give businesses that are obviously, employ a lot of people and are big engines of general tax revenues probably for the city. They don't want to stick them too many fines, but the small business person, it does not get that the usual dispensation, I'm sure. Now, Cost wanted to say something, Cost?
Yeah, I just have a question. Was this change brought in April 1?
No, they issued the press release.
No.
It's going to go May 2nd this year.
No, but I'm saying, was it suggested April 1 as an April Fool's joke?
Oh, ha ha ha.
No.
Our agenda before that, so no.
Okay. Thank you, Cost. Lori Boros, give me Lori.
Okay, I too have a question. And that is this a program that they are offering to anybody who does business in the city, or is it specific companies that they're offering it to, or like who is getting offered this? I mean, certainly it's not individuals, right? I mean, individuals can't take advantage
not individuals.
of this. Okay, so
but
what
my understanding is that anybody, it's not just certain, businesses. It says anybody can offer to be a part of it. If you basically you waive your right to a hearing and you pay a stipulated fine. Anybody can do that. Business.
I'll just read the little blurb on the department on the New York City Gov website. New York City Delivery Solutions Program for businesses is for businesses that must make deliveries as a course of doing business. Once enrolled, you can manage your parking tickets through a web-based reporting tool and have the ability to create bills and request hearings online. By participating in this program, businesses waive their right to challenge parking tickets and agree to pay a preset reduced fine amount for each offense. The type of violation determines whether the ticket will be dismissed or reduced. Red light and bus lane camera violations are not eligible for reductions, but they are eligible for hearings. There is no fee to participate in this program. Commercial. So that's really all it says here about.
Yeah.
So from what I understand is that someone or a company would sign up for this program like in advance, right? And then just agree to pay the greatly reduced fines as they come about. Okay.
Correct.
And is I think I know the answer to this question, but they're not saying that or are they saying that if you as an individual driver, if you agree to pay this fine, then you won't have to, like, they're not giving it to individual drivers, right? There's like no way that this can apply. And that kind of bothers me, I think. I'm thinking about this and I don't like the way this sounds. Because I mean, the trucks are the ones that are causing a great bit of the problem, and they're, the companies make money. They're not, nobody's like going out of business, making deliveries in New York. All right. Well, anyway, I'm just ruminating, but I'm inclined to not support this. This doesn't sound like a right idea. And I think that everybody who's, who's a driver and is going to get pissed off because, why are they getting, I mean, they're already pissed off about the fact that the trucks are taking up all the spaces and, causing traffic and now they're going to get reduced fines, for doing that. I mean, that just doesn't sound right. I'm sorry. Okay, that's it.
Well, somebody who became the defense secretary many years ago said General Motors, is basically very, an important part of America is, has a special place when it was the big car company. And so the business of America is business, right?
Right. Well, I mean, I understand that. I do understand that. But I don't think that this is going to be accepted by, people in general, like drivers who, I mean,
Lori,
I know
it's been there for years. This is just a change to the program to try to collect a little bit more on the stipulated fines. But it's a minor change when you look at it. As we were saying, it's only 3.6 million in additional they're going to raise. That's still going to so UPS, instead of saving 20 some million or whatever they will only save maybe 19 million instead of 20 million.
Yeah, but then they'll save money on the lawyers who won't have to go to court,
Well, they don't go to court now anyway. They don't go to court now anyway because they're just paying the stipulated penalties. They don't want to waste time on that.
Well, I guess
wait, I'm sorry. I'm really confused about this. And I know this is my pea brain at work, but so is there there's a stipulated program now and they're just talking about reducing the fines?
Oh yeah. It's been in place for quite a while. Yeah.
Right. So it's been in place since 2004. And the reason that I thought it was worth bringing up now is if these changes are supposed to go in effect in early May, and we were aware of this, I didn't know if we wanted as a board as a committee to comment on any of the proposed changes that we may not agree with, or even if we don't take a position on the program. So to me, what I highlighted before in regards to double parking in bus lanes, I found objectionable and would be something that I would like to be able to on the record say I think we shouldn't see reductions in fines, and to indicate concern for any reductions that truly impact whether it be safety, double parking, bus speeds, etc. Whether it would be a resolution or a letter or nothing, I just want to at least give people the option to consider that.
No, I agree. Right. I think we ought to make a statement on the program. Fine.
Okay.
Rita?
Thank you.
Rita Popper next. Can we unmute Rita?
Does this do anything like FedEx and UPS pay a blanket rate, not an individual tax rate? Is this going to raise their annual rate?
Well, it's not. Well, what it says is on certain things, like for double parking, they're now paying $35 for a ticket. It's going to be $65. So they're going to end up paying. They're going to end up paying more, but the fine is normally $115. So they're still paying, a little over half of what the fine would be. And it saves them, they have, like UPS, as Craig was saying, 240,000 tickets. So over, they were only paying $35 a ticket. So they were saving, a huge amount of money. And that's how that was where the $20 million figure came from. And so now that they'll be paying a little more, so they won't save quite as much, Rita. That's how it'll turn out. But not significant. They'll still save a significant amount of money.
No matter what they charge, it goes back to the consumer who is going to end up paying for it. And they raise their price. And what's a nickel on a Coca-Cola bottle and takes care of their raises. I don't know. It sounds like a license to do something that's double parking. If a taxi driver is helping a disabled person to their door and comes back and finds a double parking ticket on their windshield, it's difficult. That person, At any rate, I'm not sure I understand this.
Well, how about this? I'm not sure if I technically can offer a resolution, but if I were to, I would suggest something.
Well, I think there's some. I think we may want to do that.
Well,
she's next after Rita.
Yeah. Do you want me to hold off, or should I say what
Yeah. Why don't you hold off? See what Michelle.
Okay.
Rita, did we answer your questions so far? You okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we go? Michelle is next. Go ahead, Michelle.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, as a community board, and in terms of how things impact us and our quality of life, we have much bigger fish to fry than this. Our big concern shouldn't be how much money these big companies are making. I am concerned about compliance, however, and rather than take any more time and nitpick every piece of this bill to determine if $65 is right or $35 is right or whatever, I suspect it's a fait accompli. What I would like to suggest, to point out the particularly egregious things, like almost encouragement for being at a bus stop that is troublesome. How about a letter? I would suggest the co-chairs, and if you would ask Russell to just write a letter that our committee, reviewed the program and a couple of things stand out to us and we would like them to re-examine it. But I wouldn't go too much, over a waterfall for this thing, spend any more time on it.
Well, and that was sort of the direction I was going in. And as I said, I was going to leave it to everyone whether it should be a letter or a resolution.
I think a letter.
But either way, I mean, and I was going to suggest a resolution, as I think you heard, but I think you're right, Michelle, in terms of keeping it more general and saying we as a community are concerned about promotion of double parking and bus lanes being blocked, so on and so forth, and we as a community were made aware that the stipulated fine program includes some changes that include the reduction of fines in certain situations, and we oppose any reductions in fines as of May, whatever, when it would go into effect.
Well, that's much more specific though, Craig. Once you're saying you oppose any reduction in fines, I mean, I'm not for reducing their fines, so don't get me wrong. But I think as a letter, it would have bigger weight, more weight, if you would point out the few particularly egregious and troubling things, like the bus stop. Because this program is a fait accompli. There's nothing this is not something we really can affect, really. Because the lobby or the big businesses, I mean, you're not going to fight the UPS lobby and the FedEx lobby. I mean, it's sort of silly. We have to pick our battles. Yeah. But I think it's perfectly valid to point out that some of the particularly egregious ones really do affect our safety and our quality of life. But I wouldn't make a blanket statement of anything, actually. We want something on every corner, or we don't ever want anything. Those are sort of like too broad-based statements for me personally. So I don't know. In this particular case, I would see a letter, because I don't see the full board taking much more time on this. And then I can just see at the full board, you're going to have to explain this much more thoroughly. There'll be a ton of questions and whatever. I'm not sure it's worth the time. But anyway, that's my opinion.
And I appreciate that, and I'll let others weigh in as well. I would just say that I think one of the intents of this discussion in my mind was, this is one of those under the radar programs that I think 95% of people are completely unaware of, and just us raising the issue and bringing it some daylight, or putting some spotlight on it is, I think, helpful in terms of addressing the future of it and raising the issues regarding double parking and how the city policies are inconsistent. So that was, I think, part of that. And again, I defer to the committee and their opinion on this. All right, I see Valerie's hand is up.
Yeah, I just, I'll agree that the letter is probably the best way to go, since all the fines are going up. I think, to point out that the bus lane is a reduction, just as you said earlier, Craig, is just a inconsistency with what we're hearing in terms of what the DOT is trying to put forward. And so it just seems to be working at cross purposes to what the DOT is trying to do, and we should point that out, I think. But just an FYI, I think this program has actually been around a lot longer. My impression is maybe it was known by another name, but it's been around since Mayor Koch was a mayor, where he actually did this for all of the Verizon, all of the, Con Ed, and then it just got expanded. But it's been around forever, but it is not a very well-known program. And that's one of the reasons why these trucks are sitting there all day long. So yeah, I think we should go on record. I would point to the bus stops as the worst offense. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Any other comments? No, we can go on. Okay. Item 4 is a discussion regarding subway platform barriers and stations in Community Board 8 where they may be feasible. Now, what they did here was that so far, the MTA is saying that the stations that could accommodate these kinds of doors, and everybody knows what they are, you've seen them in other subways systems where they not doors, but they're basically, you have sheets of whatever, it's plastic or whatever, that are along the tracks, and the only opening is where the door is, and that only opens when there's a train in the station. Otherwise, it's completely closed, and you can't fall onto the tracks or be pushed onto the tracks, as happens. Like, if you're in Paris, the Paris Metro and stuff, you can't get onto the track so easily, and it's and in a lot of other systems. But here, they're in the MTA. At first, the history of this, they first said, well, they had like a 1,000-page report or 900-page report that said why you couldn't do this. So then they got pushed to do this, and they said, okay, we'll look where we can accommodate these things. So there was another report issued where they said they could accommodate it on the Q trains at 96, 86, 72nd, and Lexington at 63rd, where that 63rd could also, not only the Q, but the R train, Roosevelt Island, the F train, Lexington Avenue, 59th, the 6 train, and 5th Avenue and 59th Street, those trains that cross over, the E trains and something like, and things like that. They couldn't accommodate platform doors, of course, at 96th Street for the 6 train, 86th Street for the 4, 5, and 6 train, 77th Street for the 6 train, 68th Street for the 6 train, and Lexington Avenue 4 and 5 train. Use stations, they apparently at this point can't accommodate it. And I don't know whether they're going to come up with ways to do that, but it seems to me, given the situation today, that it's an important thing to figure out how you can keep people from keeping access from the tracks and either falling on the tracks or going down on the tracks for whatever reason, or being pushed on the tracks. So any comments on this at this point? Leah Hanlon, I see. Can we unmute Leah?
Yes, I just wanted to note that the platforms on the Q train are huge, whereas the platforms on the Lexington are tiny, and the places where you're going to be crowded or forced or more easily pushed onto the track is the Lexington Avenue trains. So if they are proposing to spend globs of money to put up barriers on the Q trains, they might as well spend it on accessibility or something else, because that's not where the risk is on the Q trains.
Yeah, I think they're basically saying that the configurations or things with the stations don't, and of course they are the older stations that don't.
I understand, but then they might as well not bother, because there's not very much risk on the Q trains. The places where they claim they can't fix it is where the problem is. So I think it's too late in the evening for me to come up with a clever metaphor, but they're just pretending to address the problem by putting expensive barriers in places where it will do little good. That's my thought.
I do want to just note that I think that when you hear instances of people being pushed, it's not only during times where subway platforms are crowded. This could happen at anywhere at any time. Sometimes I feel least safe when there are fewer people around.
It's true, but I'm sorry.
No. I just want to make that distinction. I'm not disagreeing necessarily with your point. I just didn't want people to necessarily think that there's a clear correlation between crowdedness and falling over, that you could have an incident that is not caused by crowding where
that's absolutely true, but I think there probably is quite a correlation, especially pre-pandemic, when the platforms are really narrow and really crowded, accidents are more likely to happen. It seems crazy to put them on the Q train, because nobody has to really wait all that close to the edge on the Q train, and the crowds are not going to push them over. It just seems like a much lower risk.
Thank you, Lee. Boaz Galil, I think, is next. Can we unmute Boaz?
Yes. So basically, from what I read, they are talking about the budget for that is $100 million to install the barriers, and then another $15 million for maintenance every year. Now, my suggestion to you guys is put a resolution to give the money to me, and I promise with $100 million and $15 million every year to protect all the subway station in Community Board 8 with zero accident. Trust me, I'm willing to put to sign it, and this is such a waste of money, unbelievable. That's it for my end.
Okay, thank you. Adam Friedlander is next. Can we unmute Adam?
Yep, I just want to point out that this is not only a safety issue, but it also helps keep the tracks clean. And the MTA spends millions of dollars trying to clean those tracks of debris, not only just cleaning them for like visual purposes, but it causes fires on the tracks. So it delays trains. Obviously the MTA has to clean it up at some point. So this will have a cost savings along with actually, like, even if you're paying for these doors, like it's not just a safety issue, it causes delays of trains and other work to be done on the tracks. Thank you.
You're absolutely right, Adam. There's a lot of that's a big issue in the subway system. Let's see, I guess we go to the board. I don't see any others here.
No.
Can we go to Michelle Birnbaum? Michelle?
Thank you. This is such a heart-rending situation, because this whole thing is a big mental health issue. It's caused ridership to go down. The subways are not safe. The victims are rising daily. It's just a heartache all around. But let me point this out if I could. They seem to be saying that the older stations, it's too difficult to implement this program. Well, that's this program as presented. My recollection in Paris, what I recall, is that the gates were closed at the stairway to the platform, and that those gates only opened when the train was already at the station, so that there were no riders on the platform as the train was moving into the station or departing the station. To have what Chuck has described, which I'm not really sure with how this thing works with plastic and coming in and out and whatever, and forcing everybody through one door, that seems to be a bit of a crowd control problem in and of itself, to have a whole platform of people trying to get through one door.
No, it's not just one door. No, it's not. It's not one door, Michelle. It's all where the door is open. It'll be the same openings that they have now.
Oh, okay. Because, well, yeah, the protection has to be where the door is open. Otherwise, right. That's the risk. But anyway, it seems to me that if they did it by putting gates in front of the access stairs, they can do it in every station, no matter how old the station is. If you could picture in your mind's eye the Lexington and 86th Street station, the local, you go down one staircase to the local track. If there was a gate in front of that until a train was in the station and that gate opened, you're protecting that station. Same thing when you go down to the express track. And it's really not for us to come up with the method as to how they can do this on a station by station basis, because obviously you need engineers and you need expertise and you need industrial designers and you need all kinds of things. But we can say that we are in favor of a protective program so that riders are not on the station before a train pulls in. In other words, that they don't become vulnerable. And that would protect the idea of debris on the track as well. So I'm confident that there is such a thing out there. I witnessed it in Paris, and I'm sure they could do it here. I don't know. I don't know who's the lead agency on this? Who are the designers? Who are the engineers? Is this who's taking the lead on this?
MTA.
So this is the MTA, but the MTA has to think a little bit out of the box. Maybe they don't have, their design team maybe can't handle this, but they ought to put some feelers out all over the country and all over the world, because there is a way to do this. And of course, the best cure for this problem would be treatment of the mentally ill and coming up with that kind of a program. And that would save suffering all around for the perpetrators and for the victims.
Thank you, Michelle. Lori Boris.
Hi. I'm not going to say a lot about this because it's just incredibly frustrating for me to even deal with the MTA, because I've heard so many times of all of their excuses for why they can't do something. And I just don't buy it. It's like why they can't put in double elevators, where the elevators exist, why they can't put in, elevators to make it accessible, why they can't now, do the safety doors. So it's just, I really, it's incredibly frustrating to me. But the bottom line is, I've changed the way I ride the subway now, because I won't stand anywhere where I can be pushed from behind. But I just want to say that we live in the greatest city in the world, and we can do whatever we put our minds to. So I'm really tired of all the excuses. I was going to say at the beginning, we should not spend time on this. We should spend on time making it accessible, which we should. But I just think that I just don't buy any of the excuses that the that the MTA comes at us with, and to compare, you know, the 6 station to the Q station and saying, well, we could do it in the Q, but we can't do it in the 6. It's like, you know, come on. It's like, I just don't buy it. And I'm going to stop talking now because I'm just going to get angry. So just give it to Rebecca, I guess, to pick up the accessibility thing. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Cost?
Yeah, Chuck, what was the reason that they could do it on the Q platforms? What was the reason they could do it on the Q platform but not on the 6 platform?
I just think it was these are all the new stations, and it looks like they had the ability to do it there. First, they said they couldn't do it anywhere, but I guess with the Q trains, and they are doing it like for the 6 train at 59th Street, has to do with the configuration of the stations, and
Right.
And a lot of the stations, you know.
But I thought some of it also was whether the platforms could bear the weight of it as well. I thought I recall reading that.
But you know,
all it is perspex sheets, solid sheets, floor to ceiling, and opening at the. There's no weight involved. There's no thickness involved, and you've got what 6-7 feet of platform on the Lexington line. I mean, that's where it's important, at the crowded stations, rather than at the queue where you've got what 40, 50, 60 feet of space that you can, you know, it's absolutely ridiculous what they're thinking of. Sorry for the wording, but
no, I understand. It's frustrating.
It's more than that.
Yeah, there are many stations. I'm just looking it up. There are apparently many stations that supposedly couldn't bear the weight of the barriers. Whether that's true or not, or whether that was used as an excuse initially to say no.
Cost has got a point. You could find a much. You wouldn't need that heavy a barrier. There's plenty of barriers you could put up that would do the job. They wouldn't have to weigh that much. Depends what it is. It's,
2 or 3 pounds of linear foot. That's. Can we find out why? What was their reasoning? If it's weight, what weight? How much per linear feet?
Well, there's a report that they've done. I'm sure it's more reading than any of us want to do, but it's probably something in there about that.
There's a 4,000-page report that was issued in February 2020. If you want to.
No, thanks.
Scan through it.
You can look through, but you could probably find that maybe fairly easily. But look, Michelle's point before, now Paris, by the way, does not do that now. They used to have. I mean, Paris has tunnels where people would walk out to the subway here and the barrier only lifted when the train entered the station. They don't have that now. They don't do that now. But you could have a barrier just inside the turnstiles, which could be any kind, you know, if there's enough room, and it could be made of lightweight material. It wouldn't have to be the whole length of the platform even. It would just be, you know, you just couldn't get out of there and get on the train until the train came in. And I could figure, as we were saying, you could a little thinking, you could probably come up with a solution, which they haven't seemed able to do.
Yeah, but it's not just the weight. There are other issues as well. I mean, we talked about the configuration of the platforms and the width, but you also have the issue that different lines run different types and models of trains, and not every train has doors located in the same places where you'd be able to have platform barriers that would necessarily allow you to align them with the doors. So that, not to say that can't be overcome as well, and that you devise a system where it opens entirely, but many, if you could picture, say, how the air train platform doors work, they align with where the the doors of the train sets are as well.
Yeah. Rebecca Lamort.
Hi. Yeah, just to continue on what Lori was touching on, if this is $100 million that the MTA is going to pay and one elevator costs $1 million, this could be 100 elevators. And when so little of our system is accessible, it's pretty egregious to me that we're going to worry about platform experience when safety is a priority. I'm not saying that at all. But again, we're going to prioritize platform experience for people that can access the platforms. And there's so many New Yorkers, myself, others here, that struggle to do so in a lot of stations. So that's what I wanted to add to this conversation. I think it's very short-sighted to allocate money for this. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. This is about addressing people's mental health. This is about housing. This is about jobs. This is about healthcare. This is about accessibility. This is about so much. But like many things, the MTA is choosing to not prioritize what needs to be done in the system. So that's what I would like to see us reflect in whatever feedback to the MTA, that safety is absolutely a priority for us, but accessibility is the first priority, and money should not be allocated or spent anywhere in the system for these barriers unless those stations where they're going to be put in are already fully soup to nuts accessible, because it's egregious. It's insulting, again, for them to be doing this and just using money. They found $100 million for this, but they can't find money for accessibility. What are we doing here? We're making choices, and you're not making a choice to help me or help people in our community. So that's what I would really like us to be sure the MTA takes back as a part of this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Billy Freeland, I think, is next. Billy? Billy? Okay.
Yes, so I agree with Rebecca. It is a little shocking to me that suddenly we can find $100 million when we have these vast accessibility needs that have gone unaddressed and still go unaddressed. This is $100 million for a pilot at 3 stations. It's not the entirety of the station, it's Times Square, but just the 7-line track. Plus, I think you've got 2 other stations, one being the, JFK Airport Station in Queens, and then you've got the 3rd Avenue Station just on the L line in Manhattan, out of 472 stations. So I think this is
Billy,
a little bit, pardon?
There's a bunch of stations that I read, maybe missed that I read out before in our area, all the Q stations in our area, and 63rd Street, et cetera. So there's a few more.
Sorry, Chuck. Well, those aren't part of the pilot, though, are they?
Yeah.
Okay, so the article I was reading talked about, pardon?
I thought there were only 3 as part of the pilot. I think you're right. It was JFK, 3rd Avenue.
Oh, this is okay. So maybe that's right. Maybe they say they could accommodate or could not accommodate, but right. They don't. The pilot's only a few of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
But so anyhow, that's $100 million for that pilot of those 3 stations. You're right, Chuck, that there are the stations that they've listed as potentially working in our community district, and so I just want to address those briefly. So if we were to do something saying we'd like to see this pilot expanded to our district, I agree with those who have said it's really not necessary on the queue for a couple reasons. One, just given the general busyness or lack thereof of those platforms, but also you do have the space to space out. And I agree with what one person said, that there's more than just safety here. There's about trash getting on the tracks. But if we're going to spend any money on something like this, we really need to critically evaluate, okay, where's the safety need greatest and where is the need for track cleanliness greatest? And I would be surprised if it were on the queue line. I would like us to focus, if anywhere, on the 6th line. It's my understanding that the Lex Avenue 59th Street station, the 6th platform, would be viable according to that 4,000-page report. And I looked at that report, so you all don't have to briefly while we're talking. And here's what I pulled. For those who are curious, the 4 and 5 train tracks were determined to be not feasible. And here's what it says: not feasible as their implementation would result in non-compliant ADA conditions. In the implementation of a platform edge barrier, the pinch point requirement for ADA compliant wheelchair movement would not be met, as the remaining width would be too narrow. So my understanding just from looking at that report briefly is that it's not feasible for ADA reasons, but it would be feasible on the 6-line track. And then it also mentions Rosewood Island, the F train line. It's feasible, as well as 5th Avenue, 59th Street, where you have the N and W trains. So if we're going to focus anywhere, I would focus on the busiest stations. I believe of those 3 I just mentioned, Lexington at 59th Street is the busiest. So that may be, if we want to advocate for anything, it would be there. But again, I just want to go back to the original point. I think it's a little bit short-sighted when we have all these other infrastructure needs to then be pouring the money, into the screen door proposal. And yes, we want to advocate for our community, but the reality is the greatest need there is going to be Times Square, probably Union Square, these incredibly busy stations. So if it were up to me, I would say let's focus on our accessibility needs in the district. Let's continue to push resolutions that call for MTA funding for those needs, for elevators, for working escalators, for accessibility, for hearing and vision impaired neighbors. But I think this is kind of money chasing after a problem that simply is not of the same scale as the accessibility crisis in the city. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Billy. Michelle, wanted further comment?
Yes, thank you. I would like to see us write a letter expressing these concerns to the MTA and actually challenging them on the fact that the method by which they chose to approach this particular safety issue, that they have not explored, they haven't explored the possibilities enough. Once you take the structure off the tracks, and once you take the preventive barrier off the platform and off the tracks, and you put it where I had suggested before, even though Chuck may mention very correctly that maybe they're not doing that anymore in Paris, but it was a very efficient thing to do. And I don't think there's any doubt they can still pick their most dangerous stations and implement it wherever, their stats tell them to, but they will be able to implement it. In other words, there won't be a status of stations. Every single station will have the ability to implement a door at the entry point, whether you have to adapt that in some way, whether you have to make it in 2 parts or 3 parts, make it taller, make it shorter, have it near steps, have it near other access. That's all adaptable to the location. But as a process with the materials needed, that's the only thing that makes sense, because I can certainly see that if I propose something for a set of tracks, that an engineer could tell me 50 different reasons why it can't be there. So I think we ought to express to the MTA and include in that we're disappointed that they're not addressing accessibility issues and using some of the money for that, but to please be far more creative and to put the barriers at the entry to the platform where crowds are not permitted onto the platform until the train is in the station. And I think if we could put that as part of a letter, that would be the best thing, because number one, I think it could get a lot of support. And number two, it throws it back to the engineers. It's an idea. We can't possibly vote on every platform. If their engineers are saying they can't do what they're proposing on Lexington Avenue, I'm not going to stand up and say, oh, yes, you can. But I can say, okay, so don't do it there. So over there, put doors, they have to think. And I think we should intimate that in a letter and send a very strong one to them, that we're disappointed in their solution. It's not far thinking enough, it's not creative enough, and it doesn't take advantage of all the possibilities that are out there.
Yeah, Michelle, I just need to respond to that, because as a transportation planner, what you're suggesting in terms of putting gates up to prevent people from accessing platforms would be incredibly unsafe and will not work for many logistical reasons in the New York City subway system, whether it be because you don't have enough space in subway access and egress points, or prior to turnstiles, or prior stairwells, or because of the fact that in many cases people transfer between lines and you absolutely need to use platforms in order to get on and off. And so, and then I'm not making any judgments.
No, I just wanted to say, I understand what you're saying. It's very valid what you're saying, and those kinds of circumstances, I'm sure, can be dealt with, whatever. We cannot deal with that. Our job is to evaluate this, think of maybe other alternatives, and then the engineers have to see what's feasible and where. So what they have currently proposed is not feasible in too many places. So it makes it's not a broad reaching program. If what I'm suggesting on Station A, they can't do it near the turnstiles, fine. Can they do it near the steps? Can they do it where there's no changeover? Can they do it? I mean, that's for them to figure out. We're not figuring that out station by station here. But this is happening far too often. I mean, considering the concerns and the upset that we all have when there's a traffic accident, and you're thinking there were about 3 of these subway incidences last week, not to mention the slashers and the grabbers and the rapists and all. I mean, I know my family doesn't use the subway anymore. This is no longer a good revenue stream for the city. And it can be solved, but not with what they're suggesting, because it doesn't cover enough territory. It's too limited. It makes no sense. They have to go back to the drawing board.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle. Costs? We unmute costs.
Billy had his hand up first. If you want to.
Oh, Billy.
And he's already unmuted. So.
Okay, go ahead, Billy.
So I do not agree with such a letter, respectfully. I was going to give the reasons Craig gave, but he did them so eloquently. I won't repeat those. But the other reason is I don't agree with asking the MTA to reevaluate that 4,000-page report. Frankly, I think the MTA has a lot on its plate right now, and I don't want to ask them to add more. They've clearly they've made a concession on this because they didn't want to do any platform barriers at all. They've conceded to doing a pilot program of 3. And I think if we look at the needs in the city, if we're going to do this anywhere, I don't see the need being great in our community district. Maybe that's not a popular thing to say. So I don't know what a letter would advocate, but if it's advocating for reevaluating the whole system, I don't think that's the best use of the MTA's time. If anything, probably the closest thing I could get on board with is if we wanted to identify one station or a couple stations where we feel this is especially necessary, let's do that. But let's also make clear that we want them prioritizing our accessibility needs. So I'm just really not inclined to support a letter. I don't think it's the right priority for our community district right now. I think there are greater needs elsewhere in the system, and I think our accessibility needs far outweigh this particular proposal.
Thanks, Billy. Let me get Adam Friedlander, one public member who's raised his hand now. Can we unmute him? Adam Friedlander.
Yeah, I sort of think the fundamental problem here is that MTA costs are extremely out of whack with what are done internationally. The amount of money that the MTA has to spend for one of these projects is so exorbitant where they're unable to do anything. So I think accessibility is an extreme issue, and it's crazy that they have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to install elevators. They need to be able to get their costs down so that they can get elevators everywhere, and then they can focus on putting on platform doors as well. Like, just because costs are exorbitant doesn't mean this is a bad project. It means that there are other priorities for these things. Like, accessibility should be number 1, but also MTA should be able to get costs of these things down, because everywhere else in the world is able to do these things a lot more cheaply. Like, if we're going to send a letter to the MTA, it should be asking why do these things cost so much when everywhere else they're much, much cheaper? Because if things were much, much cheaper, then we'd be able to do more of these projects and do them a lot more quickly.
Thank you. Lori Boris.
Yeah, I don't support a letter telling them that they have to try something different because they clearly don't want to. I think we just need to keep the pressure on them to go with the accessibility, and the other stuff, you know, I guess we'll get to when they get to it, but it's just accessibility is the number one thing. I mean, it should have been done 50 years ago, but you know, better late than never. It's like, let them get the stations accessible, and we'll come up with, you know, ways to deal with the doors, you know, or whatever later. That's it.
Thank you. Rebecca Lamort, last speaker. Go ahead, Rebecca.
I agree with Lori and Billy. The letter I'm not in support of. I don't want to ask them to reassess this, because when they do, they'll just come back with more of the same. We need to keep pushing on accessibility. At a certain point, no disrespect to Adam, it's not about cost and cost savings and making this cheaper. It's about the MTA caring about me, caring about Lori, caring about others on the community board that struggle to use our system. And at any point in time, they'll always say, we can't afford it, cost. But again, overnight, they found $100 million, which is a lot of money. So we need to maintain that accessibility is the priority here and not these barriers at all.
Good, thank you. I mean, I think the sentiment is not to send the letter, and I think we're fine with that. At least I am, and I think Craig is probably too. Why don't we go now to any New York City DOT, updates, and we have Colleen Chattergoon, a representative to our board. Colleen, any thing you want to report on tonight?
Colleen, you can unmute whenever you're ready.
Can we unmute Colleen?
She may have stepped away from her computer for a second, but as soon as she's there, she is.
Hey, it's Colleen Chattergoon from City DOT.
Hi,
How is
Colleen.
everyone?
Colleen, how are you?
Good. I'm so glad that my colleagues were able to attend tonight's meeting to talk about freight and mobility and what we're doing to address double parking and safety concerns regarding deliveries of commercial vehicles. We have started our milling and paving schedule, and I've been telling a lot of community boards that if you know of a street that is in need of milling and paving, please share those streets with Will, and we will do a street assessment to determine if we can add it onto the schedule for this year. So please do let Will know if there's any streets that are in need of milling and paving. And we continue to work with restaurants on the outdoor dining, inspecting and letting them know, especially those that are not in compliance, to letting them know what they need to fix so that they can be in compliance. And we've continued to do second and third, inspections. And so far, all has been well in terms of, the restaurant owners making the changes so that they are in compliant with the guidelines. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, I know there's going to be, why don't we go to any new or old business? You can, and Colleen, stay here because I know there's going to be some questions for you on this.
Yes.
And well, Valerie Mason, why don't you go ahead?
So, okay, so wait a minute. So don't give my question to Colleen, go to the new business first. I'm a little confused.
No. This is part of new or old business. You could have a question, Colleen.
Okay, well, the question for Colleen is, Colleen, on this milling and paving, I sent you the thing about the entrance by the subway. And you said it's not a milling and paving issue, that we need to have a catch basin installed?
That's correct, Valerie. So it's not a milling and paving issue with what's going on there. What's happening is that the water is not flowing because there's no catch basin at that corner.
Okay, well, how come it took 6 years to find that out? Because every time we asked about it previously, they said it was a matter of grading the street, because the catch basin is in the middle of the block between 72nd and 73rd. And it seems to go around the 73rd Street corner and come into the middle and be caught, but not on your corner. I mean, I'm happy to have Will reach out to DEP and ask for a catch basin, but since you're milling and paving anyway, maybe we should try to do that first.
So here's the story. Even if we were to mill and pave, it's still not going to alleviate the water ponding that's happening there. And when the Second Avenue subway was constructed, which you know, I was not part of that, but I don't understand why a catch basin was not at that corner. So I would recommend that, you know, the board reach out to DEP and submit a request for a catch basin.
Okay, is that something that maybe you can send a supporting email? You know, I'll send the information to Will and ask him to do that, but I tend to think that if we get something from DOT that's also recommending that would be.
I'm more than happy to put that in writing, and Will and I can work with our counterpart at DEP on that.
I appreciate that very much.
You're welcome, Valerie.
On the matter of new business, can I do that too, or is this?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So on new business, it's kind of new and old business because the East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association, along with a lot of good riders, etc., has been asking for an SBS stop at the entrance to the 72nd Street, 2nd Avenue subway stop. I don't know. I don't recall that the community board ever took a vote.
We did.
Yeah, we did.
Okay.
We did.
Can we get the resolution? Because I think maybe some of you are aware, all of the electeds wrote a letter recently, and Liz Kruger met with the new head of the MTA or New York City Transit regarding our request. And we got a letter back from Marcus, and Liz Kruger got a letter back from Marcus saying that there had only been individual requests for the stop, and that, you know, even though we had a petition with over 3,000 names, et cetera, et cetera. So if we can dredge up that resolution, maybe Marcus.
October 2016, it's on our website.
Okay, awesome. Okay, then see, it's new and old. And they were basically saying now that they would not consider putting the stop there until after 2024, when the Omni goes into effect. I mean, it's like, I don't even know. I was like, I'm in the twilight zone here. Like, I thought I was crazy when I remembered a resolution. And, you know, many of us, so anyway, we've been here a long time tonight. So Craig, maybe you can just send me the resolution.
I'm going to ask, I'm putting it in the chat now for Will to.
Okay. But we're continuing the fight for the stop. And I just wanted to let people know that the electeds are working with us, and maybe somebody will wake up at the at the MTA and figure out that this is not something that, because they said the ridership is still low on the local stop. They're still making the same argument that they made before with, why are you going to stand there at the local, wait for a local when 5 SBSs go right by you? It's ridiculous. But I'm looking forward to taking that first ride with Rita Popper on the SBS when it stops on 72nd Street. And I'll invite you all. I'll pay the fare for everybody.
You're making some progress. You're making some progress. They said they would consider it after 2024. They weren't even going to consider it, as you remember.
Exactly. Well, that it was the positive item in the letter. It's just that they seem to have forgotten that it wasn't just individuals asking for it before. So I appreciate that. Thanks very much.
Yep. Yeah, we'll put it in the chat. Valerie, we'll put it in the chat. I see.
Yeah, I just sent it in the chat for Will to put in. There are 2 different resolutions, separate resolutions for the local stop and the SBS stop.
Colleen, this is a MTA question probably, but when is the Manhattan bus redesign?
Of which particular project? Like,
no, they're doing the whole borough-wide redesigns.
Oh, well, I would
just
find out
doing
exactly
Queens
when
right
that,
now, I think.
I don't know exactly when that is. I'd have to confirm that.
It is a Marcus question. I just thought you might know.
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that.
Okay. Can we go to costs now for new or old business?
Yeah, I've got a few questions for Colleen. 80th and 1st, the SBS bus stop. What's going on there? The stand has been removed?
The stand is being.
They're referring to the shelter, and I believe that's all in conjunction with the development project taking place, the XL project that involves the
movement. Okay,
right. It involves the HSS.
Right, they're moving the bus stop. Now, are they going to come to us when they're moving the 79th SBS?
I don't, so one of the items we are asking for, I don't know, Kaz, if you were part of the discussion a few months back when Extel came.
Yeah, I was.
Okay, so at that meeting, I had invited them to this committee, and Will has been reaching out to them on a monthly basis, asking for them to come to our meeting to be able to discuss all the issues that were brought up. I believe it was the zoning and development meeting from a few months back in January, I think, to talk about all the issues related to parking and the bus stops and loading related to that project. So we're still waiting for Extel to accept our invitation, but we are asking them on a regular basis.
Okay, so when we'll ask them to come back, can we find out the address that we can get the free ice cream that was given to us?
Wait, free ice cream.
Yeah, that's what Extel promised us. Colleen,
Yes,
I was talking to somebody from Queens today. He's got a restaurant. He's got a little 10 by 10 platform on the sidewalk. He's been cited that he had to move it back a few inches or something. He's been cited for that he has to remove it because it's illegal. Now, this is a small platform, yet there are thousands and thousands of fully built structures on the sidewalk that have been there for a year, 2.5 years, that are still there and they are illegal. What is going on?
I mean, look, Kaz, there are structures that are permissible and that are within the curb lane. Whatever is on the sidewalk, and if it's not, if there's not 8 feet clearance for pedestrians, it has to be removed. What is permitted on the sidewalk is tables and chairs. Tables and chairs you can have on the sidewalk, but you're not supposed to bolt anything onto the sidewalk.
But what's going on with all these structures, and looking at what the DOT sent out right at the beginning, it showed no permanent structures. It showed a platform with 3.5 feet, 18-inch wide barriers and umbrellas on the street and only tables on the sidewalk. So what is going on with this? Oh, by the way, are you involved in the interagency rulemaking for open restaurants?
No, I'm not part of that rulemaking, but I do get information about it. Yeah.
And what agencies are involved?
Well, it's a multi-agency initiative. It's not only DOT. I mean, DOT is the enforcement agency that oversees it, but we have communication with other agencies, just as FDNY, DOB, Department of Consumer Workers Protection, and so forth and so forth.
But community boards are not involved.
Community boards are going to be involved, Kaz. I mean, we haven't gotten to that point where we're coming to the community board yet to give a presentation. We're still working on finalizing the information for the permanent guidelines.
But we don't want to be told at the 11th hour, this is what we suggest, and then we don't really have any input. And that's, that seems to be going on with many city agencies, not just yours, but, many agencies. We're told at the last minute, we give our suggestions, but then it goes nowhere. I mean, this is an important topic to take up, and I think we should be really more involved than what we are.
It is important. I agree with you 100%. It's very important. And we are going to keep the community board involved in every step of the way.
Oh, thank you.
Just so you know, I mean, I've talked to Ed Pintar, our borough commissioner, and he's told me that, you know, as they get some further along in the process, they're going to come here and solicit our comments and views before anything gets, you know, really put in stone. So I'm taking him at his word, and then we will have a meaningful chance to get involved here. And as Colleen just said, we will. I mean, the problem is now, I don't know what the timing is, because there's a court decision that just threw things back.
What's going on with the suspension and the suits, and where are we with that? Does anybody know?
The only thing, maybe Colleen can say something on this, but I'll give you what I know. The only thing I know is that the Supreme Court ruled that the environmental review was inadequate and basically sent it back for a new environmental review. Now, I'm sure the city's going to appeal that, but I don't know whether they're going to undertake any new environmental review, but that could take some time. So the whole thing might be held up at this point. Colleen, do you know anything further?
The city is currently reviewing its legal options, and this ruling does not affect the temporary program in place right now.
Right.
We're working to determine how the ruling will affect the timing of the permanent outdoor dining program, but we are confident planning for the program will continue. But you're absolutely correct, Chuck.
But that's till the end of what, October, November of this year that the temporary finishes, doesn't it?
Well, again, that's to be determined.
Oh, okay. So the end of the year is not definite, that the end of the temporary open restaurant program will terminate this year. It'll continue.
I want to believe so. That's correct.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay. Rita Popper. Next, Rita.
Hi. I can't wait to get on that bus with Valerie Mason, and I'm cheap because I only pay half fare. Colleen, what I request I have is definitely in your purview. We're back to James Cagney Place for change. The trees were installed as saplings 46 years ago. They have grown beautifully. They form an arch. They are very, very tall. And there were special lights on the street that were much taller than the trees. And now the lights are not are too tall. They're in the trees, and there's no light coming down to the street. DOT came and changed 3 lights to just the Cobra lights, nothing exciting. And when we asked them what about the rest of the lights, they said, we'll be back. That was 2 years ago. So is there any way that we can convince DOT to have those men come back and just change all the lights that are not Cobra lights, that are not low enough, at least because we have 2 evening events planned for that street and it's very dark. Thank you.
Yeah, Rita, I do recall this, and I believe that at that point we did make some repairs to a few of the lights there. But if memory serves me right, I did consult with our street lighting division, and they mentioned that they would not come back to make any more changes.
Well, it's not changing what they put in. Mm-hmm. It's just that the lights that don't light the street. I mean, I need somebody to explain this to me. 3 lights they changed and 6 lights they didn't.
That seems a bit arbitrary.
Yeah.
Why can't they just change the 6 lights?
Why can't they just change the 6 lights? Is that
I'll find out from them because I do remember.
Could you?
Why don't you find out, and we should maybe do a resolution on that if we.
No, a resolution is not necessary. Let me find out first.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Chuck.
Okay. Paul Quickler, I believe, is next. Paul. Paul.
Thank you, Chuck. Colleen, I was hoping you might have some good news for us about the resurfacing of the bridge between Roosevelt Island and Queens, the cheese grater metal bridge. That's not only uncomfortable and unpleasant, but it's dangerous. People have been asking about this for years, long before I got to live here. And the last I spoken to you about was, I think we recognized 2 things that happened. One was Ben Kados got $150,000 in the budget for the city for this year for the work to be started. And the last news you had given me was back in the spring of last year that DOT was now, I guess what you called it, I hope I get it right, looking for materials, that the stage that you were at was looking for materials. So it made me get a little bit hopeful that this spring now work would start to resurface that. So I'm hoping you might give us some good news.
Paul, from what I know, we're still looking at investigating materials. I would have to follow up with our Bridges division to find out if they found anything yet that's comparable and that's safe as well, that can be laid down in the area there. So I'll follow up with my colleague and I'll let you know. I'll keep you posted.
Can I just start follow up with one last attempt to ask you to get someone to visit? I'm happy to meet anybody who wants to come, but on that same bridge, the sidewalk is covered by what's very clearly a 1/2 inch thick of something laid down, which is actually perfect for riding a bike on and walking on, because that's what I do. I ride my bike on it when there are no pedestrians there. I get off if anyone comes. And I'm obviously speaking just as a pure layman, but it's perfect. It works already. I just love if someone could come and take a look at it and see if they could, buy some more and install that. So I make that plea one more time.
Okay, Paul, thanks. I'll take it back.
Thank you.
Lori Boros.
Hi, Colleen. A friend of mine got an email that said the Omni program was going to be expanded to senior citizens and those with disabilities soon. So my first question is, can you give us an idea about a time frame for that? And the other question is, why didn't I get a notice of it? Because, or when are you going to let the disabled community know about it? Like, I've had a disabled Metro card for a long time, and now I'm both a senior and a disabled person, and though I don't look it, I just want to know when you're going to notify people of that, because every day I run to catch the 86th Street SBS bus, and when I have to stand and put my card in there, it's like it's made me miss the bus several times. So I'm excited about the Omni program finally coming to us, and I just want to know when and how you're going to notify people.
Hi, Lori. Those are really good questions. I would defer to Will to reach out to Marcus Book at MTA to get the answer to those questions that you asked because the Omni program is under the MTA. That's their initiative.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Last, Michelle Burbine.
Move to adjourn.
Can I just say one thing before that quickly? I know we had a member of the public before who was asking about pedestrian safety, and I just want to let her and everyone else know that we have a commitment, as long as nothing changes, from Julie Menon to come to our next meeting, and she's going to be talking about issues regarding pedestrian safety and traffic calming and some of the initiatives that she's been working on. So I just want to make sure that I announced that, because I knew the question came up earlier, and that is something that this committee is obviously very concerned about.
Okay, Michelle made a motion. Is there a second to that motion there? Anybody like to second it? Okay. We have a motion to adjourn, so I believe we are adjourned and moved and seconded. Okay,
Thank
thanks
you,
everyone.
everyone.
Appreciate it.
Good night.
See you at the next